Should we start or we should still wait a bit?
I think we can start anytime, like you guys are ready.
Okay. Let's start. I will just make a simple remarks first in Mandarin Chinese. 感谢大家来到本次第7届网络社会年会香港城市论坛的会场。我想要先解释一下，就是本次的会场我们会主要以英文进行，因为我们目前的几位讲者就是在我们
is in English, because if you ask our speakers, I think most of them are comfortable speaking English. So I really hope that our conference can also be beneficial to those non-Mandarin Chinese audience as well. So I would like to say thank you to Professor Huang's team, as well as Sun Yu and her translator team. So in Zoom, you can click on the globe on Zoom right bottom, and then you can switch between Chinese and English translation. So if you choose the relevant Chinese language, you can hear the Chinese translation into Chinese. But the official language of this conference is in English. In YouTube, you can see the simultaneous live streaming of our conference. So YouTube is the English channel, and also Bilibili is the Chinese channel. Please feel free to leave your questions in Slido, and also our assistant is going to share the questions into Zoom about the Q&A and the questions they have read on the Slido. Professor Cui, you can help out as well. So after the presentations, we're going to have a Q&A session. We welcome you to ask your questions in any language you prefer, like the Chinese language or English language as well. So you can feel welcomed to respond in any language you prefer.
Thank you everyone for coming at this time to the Hong Kong City panel of 7th Annual Conference of Network Society, organized by China Academy of Art. Thank you, Professor Huang Sun-Quan and his team members, Cui Yu and many others in Hangzhou who have worked very hard to make this happen. We are the last city panel after San Francisco, Shanghai, Beijing, Hangzhou, Wuhan, and Taipei over the past week. My name is Zimu Zhang. I'm a researcher based in Hong Kong. It's my honor to organize the Hong Kong City panel today. Themed on instilling an undertow, micro-autonomous art practices and inquiries around the P2P. Today I have invited 5 great speakers whose artistic practices have been very relevant and inspiring to addressing the art, tech, and P2P topic in the context of Hong Kong. They are Linda Chiu-Han Lai, Winnie Sun, Display Distribute, Yang Jing, Quan Queenie Lee. Also, I want to thank April Liu Lei as our panel assistant, who will collect questions from audiences and facilitate the panel. I know for many of us, the past week and the ongoing situations have been a very turbulent, crucial, and critical time. So I'm also very grateful for many of us, participants and audiences who choose to gather with us in the coming 3 hours to discuss and listen to the speakers sharing. I believe this virtual communication and dialogue may still serve some urgency in our current times and timing. So this is also what I have genuinely experienced in the past city panels. A few words about the Hong Kong panel context. In the 2020 Hong Kong government policy address, art tech was one of the keywords being pushed to policy level. From this is the numerous capital investments, institutional activities. However, under this future-orientated waves, Hong Kong was sometimes promoted as a performative stage for art tech, almost a more shiny and secure version, a reverse version of cyberpunk image. Beneath the warm waves of top-down narratives, there is an undertow pulling back. An undertow of generative historical remains, people's emotional influx, and creative and destructive grassroots technologies. In Hong Kong's multiple intersecting regimes of neoliberalism, colonialism, post-colonialism, as well as ongoing Greater Bay Region making, in its urban landscape of super time-space compressment, as well as highly digitally mediated everyday life, what do local artists think and how do they act? Today we have 5 speakers who, despite many obstacles, have been carrying out practices with the P2P spirit. So to embrace a micro-artistic autonomies with feminist agendas. Again, welcome all participants to leave your questions and comments in Slido and Zoom chat during our panel. So let me welcome our first panel speaker, Linda Chilhan Lai. I will do a brief introduction of her. So Linda is a transdisciplinary artist, academic, and curator of contemporary media art. She is associate professor at the School of Creative Media, City University of Hong Kong. Her experimental video works explore Hong Kong urbanism and historiographic experiments, grounded in a feminist sensibility that integrates history, theory, and practices as central to artistic innovation. Over the years, she has initiated and helped build several artistic communities to bridge art, humanities, and science and technology, including the Writing Machine Collective and Floating Projects. So welcome, Linda, to start your presentation.
Thank you, Zimu, and thank you everyone around the camera and all my colleagues for this evening. If I'm too soft, please just let me know. Okay, I definitely feel very and truly honored to be part of this because I wasn't really sure whether P2P has anything to do with me because I was just starting to read about it. And the immediate thought is, I wish next time we have this forum, we are not on Zoom, we are on something else. That will be the practice of what we are going to talk about here. Let me share my PowerPoint. I have about 30 slides, which means I have to spend 1 minute on each one so as to complete all of them. Honestly, I have to be honest with everyone that I think tonight I'm coming here to learn, especially to learn from the several younger, very outstanding women who will be speaking after me. And so I came here with a lot of questions based on what I have been doing. And I thought I'm actually asking a lot of questions for which P2P may have an answer. So I'm very curious towards the end of this evening that I will get something out of it. So I'm really here coming to learn. A rather broad stroke introduction. As a feminist, I must have to declare that I speak with very specific speaking positions tonight. I speak as an artist and also an anthropologist. Originally, I consider myself a historian, but my methodologies are very much borrowing from anthropology. So I call myself an anthropologist historian and also an educator. And thinking about art tech as a very recent popular term, I find it a little bit ironic because where I came from, I felt a group of us have been doing this for about 18 years already. And I felt that maybe I'm not going to subscribe to this recent slogan-driven incentive. But I want to talk about art tech as it had been experienced by me and experimented through my way of 18 years. And so I will end my talk describing how I arrived at P2P, but the relevance would be rather obvious, and I would point them out through along the process. So just to give a big picture, because I can't talk about myself and what I do without looking at the big picture. And so this is the big picture. I'm not going to go through it, don't worry. But look at the year 1966, which was a very important year for me to invoke my thinking onto a long series of experiments asking the relationship between art and tech until the point when I find P2P has to come in. So just to clarify, when I think of tech, I do not think of technology as an applied portion of science. In fact, I think I borrow Stigler's definition techniques, which is to say that to affirm that art from its very beginning, from its inception, engage with innovative play with tools. And if that is the case, then art always fuels the desire for or the invention of new techniques. And so this is how, in my understanding of opening up this this question, I felt I have a role to play, even though I was not trained in the sciences. So back to those important years, 1966, the 9 evenings, the first time engineers worked together with artists, all those big names I don't need to call. Maybe you can also Google it if you are interested, including John Cage and Robert Rauschenberg, et cetera, et cetera. And 1968, 2 years after this New York event, the cybernetic serendipity was a very important showcase. And in this event, either there were machines created as cybernetic machines, such as the computer, were making artworks, or some of the artworks were themselves those machines. And I want to highlight this one because the cybernetic community is still doing conversations. And I actually attended one online, not so, I think a few months ago, and they're still trying to revisit that year and what happened there. And I suppose a lot of the people that we now know were the important predecessors of art and technology, or computational art or technical art, were already there showing their works in multidiscipline, in multifarious disciplines. The one below, 3 images, a sketch, the interior and the exterior, which shows a folk sculpture, and also interior full of mirrors for concerts and gatherings, and then a technical drawing showing how it was formed. This is closely connected to the 1966 event, where the engineers, the engineering team, I must say, who made that possible, were all employed to do this. And this is a commercial event, an experience which is repeated even in recent times, World Expo, and that one is in Osaka. So this one is a very famous sculpture that was commissioned by Pepsi Cola. On the right-hand side, I have to pinpoint this because the founding of ZKM, 1989, was a very important milestone for me. It was a place where I started to learn to construct the possible histories of media art. And with these in mind, there are 2 in brown color. I think they're kind of important. 1997, the year when Hong Kong was handed back to China, Tony Blair started to reform the New Labour, reform the Labour Party to turn it into New Labour Party, which it is complying with development in modern society. I am not entirely sure that Tony Blair actually knows what he was asking for, but he did started this out, and by luck or by whatever, it turned out to be a very successful project, and it thanks to all those anonymous people who have participated in injecting theories, policies, philosophers that were not there in the beginning because it was just an assignment. And it became an important commercial success. I think this is something to note when I think of today in Tsumo's introduction about Hong Kong. I couldn't help including this there. And then 2012, Hong Kong has always been influenced by things, in fact, about research activities in U.S. universities. So this initiative of turning STEM to STEAM, which is to add A, which is art, into the project, was supposed to redefine research agendas, which also means is to define what kinds of projects would be funded by the Research Council. I suppose this had impact on us on and off. I also want to shortly mention the 2 blue ones. Those 2 blue ones, I often got criticized for highlighting too much the School of Creative Media, but I was there from the very beginning. So we're just talking about my own story. 1999, I suppose, is a very important year. not to publicize the school itself, but what happened and the people who had involved, including Winnie, who is now part of the panel. And because of that, also 2004, my first attempt to create a community called the Writing Machine Collective, and later on make it a bigger project of envisioning how art and technology could come together in conversations with people who are trained very much in the knowledge of science, and also who are capable of coding and working with machines, and yet are already in the art arena. So that was in 2019. By the way, I seldom publicize it. Algorithmic Art, that exhibition was to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the School of Creative Media. And I make it really quiet. So how did I start thinking about art and technology, and led to the later on all the questions that I asked that led to peer-to-peer. I think my first encounter with real science and mathematics as an artist was because of two persons at the School of Creative Media who got a tiny grant and started something called the Invisible Lab. And it's in the Invisible Lab that we suddenly started to think we should have some cool courses, and two were born: Unseen Spaces, Art and Mathematics in multifarious forms. So my first attention was drawn to Unseen Spaces. These are just the images to make us feel more excited, okay, about Unseen Spaces. Now they're all seen. On the left-hand side, upper left corner, is the kind of mathematics that I learned in secondary school. But after that, I started to realize that that's not all. So the non-Euclidean geometry and higher dimensions play a very important role in those two courses that I talked about. And so some of you may recognize some of that. These images are about chaos theory, fractal, the coast of England, etc. And so this is how I started to ask myself, this is closely connected to the imaginative capacity of artists. And science pointed us to the unseen, imaginable potential spaces, and thus new ways of reimagining the world, which is what artists do as well. So, sorry, need a sip of coffee. My first attempt was not to relearn mathematics, although I was actually relearning mathematics myself very mildly. But my first attempt was to reach out to connect the unseen space with something that I already know, which is my interest in literature. So I started out thinking about making a connection between unseen spaces, which I interpreted to be what is the potential, into potential literature and experimental literature, and started a course, very, very brave. If it's now, I don't think I had the gut or the brain, the courage to start such a course called Writing Machine, and later on renamed Generative Art. So potential literature, right? So this is what the typical potential literature, and I really loved the Oulipo group and their works, because these were not just writers, they were Czech masters, they were mathematicians, they were all kinds of people who were trying to imagine how language could work using other kinds of rules and patterns and norms, and to imagine, just like the serialist in music, how to imagine a work that could be reproduced infinitely. So that generative quality was already very much here. So I started research and started restructure my course, and started to think of whether generative thinking or algorithmic thinking or the impossible or the potential were actually already there, even before they were named. And so my research pointed me to some literature that talked about examples of contemporary art, which is the upper left corner of my slides. These already have names, and they belong to specific art categories or art genres, and yet they all share a similar characteristic, that they are all thinking about rule-based creativity, working on a tiny unit, you can call it a seed or whatever, and grow it infinitely with rules. The lower right-hand side are some of the first works that I created after creating the course writing machine, and later on turned that into an exhibition. I suppose on the right-hand side is a work that is non-interactive itself, like an organism. Rules define how the words change size and movement on the screen space. We are just looking at it. Whereas in the square, the blue square here, it is interactive. It is a whole bunch of Chinese text. And if we move, the lines would change the network so as to weave and reweave the connectivity or the arrangement on the flex space of those Chinese characters to make some kind of sense of the possible meanings that might be there. And then Just Code, thanks to Winnie Soon, who is here. She is the author. First time we started to have a work that is about networks. And also her other works, maybe she will talk about that later. And right-hand side, a live performance of interpretation of moving images. And this is Godard's Overview, a work that is projected onto a wall with many units of screen. So we were looking at the live breaking down, deconstruction of the works, and based on lower level qualities of cinema, such as movement and shot size, or the contrast between light and shade, and reconstructed into something else. I must go back a little bit. In the beginning, I was too desperate to make something work. So a lot of things that I questioned were not questioned at that time. So we started off with major companies, Macromedia at that point, and started with Director Lingo and X-Flexion Script, two softwares, just to make something, right? Just to make students get excited. But I was very aware of the fact that at that time, when I visited Germany, Berlin, I noticed that the very first interactive museum packages were actually made with by Director Lingo. So I thought it is not just an accident. Maybe there is something there. So I was actually very curious. Just no time to talk about the writing machine, but these are all the things we have done. The very first on the right-hand side, which is just, let's see what happens, playing with some packaged software tools. The second one, third one, but I think maybe more importantly is like, for example, the middle one, lower, computational thinking. The word thinking is important because we were always wanting to share this, not only to programmers or people who can code, but to ordinary people. So computational thinking pre-exists computational works. Or on the left-hand side, lower, what you read is not what we write, is, I think, the easiest way to tell people what media art is really about. What you see is not what we put there. And the top three was our edition 6, 3 different kinds of expanded cinema. And then later on, this past edition, again, Winnie Soon was part of the team. We were thinking about learning communities and how to go back to some of the more humanities dimension to critique, to talk about principles. It is time we did that now, with so many years have gone by and works presented. So I'm not going to repeat this, but this is already explained just then. But you may see that the kind of softwares we are using are also changing. I did not make an exhaust list, but the upper left-hand side are the earlier ones. Inform 7 was something we used to write interactive novels in words. Processing, of course, a major tool, because by then we started to think about open source tools instead of subscribing to Macromedia or Adobe right now. And we also did a big events with children using MIT invented Scratch, and it was kind of great fun. And they were creating a lot of Chinese characters and make Chinese characters walk and run and jump and somersault with Scratch. But later on, I mean, right now, I think we are more sophisticated. So I can only highlight it with image that we really started to think about neural networks and also to think of AI and machine learning and deep learning in a more serious way beyond what the commercial arena is interested in. You can ask me to turn back to this slide, but this list is definitely incomplete. But I list for the past 18 years, all the people who have walked alongside with me. So it seems like it was a very lonely journey, but it isn't, except that we like people to know that there had been a lot of people contributing to thinking about art and technology, and it's not new. Maybe something I was quite proud of, the first writing machine exhibition catalog was already in the form of a hypertext. There was no print version of this. And if you ask me, I can give you the link. You can go in and everything is connected. A lot of keywords were highlighted and connected to different pages. Actually, Writing Machine 2 also had a hypertextual catalog. But because of a lot of the things, the changes in computer platform, we can't play that anymore. And that was very important. Let me go a little bit back to my own work. What did I do all these years? This is my very first work, 2004. Again, as I said, experimental literature. So this was the first writing machine that I made together with Keith Lam. It's called the Crypt Machine. It has 3 works. You can get in and we have stored up a lot of image and text and you can match them. The second one is you can import your own text and images and play a similar game. But I want to say a bit more about Echo, because Echo is very much from my creative writing class. We have text already input in the main text, and then there are echo lines. So the structure is like popular music. A stanza, at the end of it, there's a repeated line to say, hip, hip, hooray, at the end of each stanza, something like that. And participants are going to add their own hip, hip, hooray kind of echo sentences, or to add the main line, main text. The process test is when they press a button and choose everything, they have all the criteria, you will see a new poem that has been working until 5 years ago, when I realized it could only play on PC, cannot play on Apple. And now it can't even play on PC. So I have to do it again. And I was thinking P2P, to me, in a way, stands for another opportunity to create online writing games that could be shared with a designated group of people. The interruption, as I said, was more and more towards open source was the direction. Platform change make the work impossible to repeat itself. And also I felt I need to equip myself better. I need a little bit of hands-on knowledge of coding. Best would be if I could code, which never happened, not yet. I hope it will happen soon in future. But there are so many other things I can learn. The continuity is to how to reconstruct an online poetry creative platform with a closed network. And that is when I started to make my first connection with P2P. I did more works, which is more about computational combinatorial literature, which is also to borrow the idea of electronic music. I turn video clips into video samples to form the data set. And also it's a kind of generative cinema. In fact, it's my way of analyzing cinema, since my background is from film studies. But I was already very much fascinated by the notion of open work. The next very important concept that changed a lot of my teaching and my own work is the notion of cybernetics. This is a famous work, amazing. how this work was so much fun with children and everyday person. Cybernetics, in a nutshell, is a closed system with control and communication. So the input and output are all within a set kind of digital or mechanical geography, and they connect, and then they become a kind of working, a kind of game, or even drama or theater. So this is one that I created with my own group, the Floating Projects. The images on the right-hand side, lower, shows that was the most popular work with children, because they sat in front of the machine. They just pull all the plugs and replug them, and then all the images would change. I didn't know that for children, this is such a fun way, and a fun way to learn what cybernetics may mean. This is, on the left-hand side, is the sketch. This is the real diagram that the group has created to talk about how this machine is about putting together pre-screened images. And yet it has multiple exits for people who are sitting on an armchair to look at the images, or for children to play, or adults to play with it, to plug and unplug, to change the sound and the visual and the visions. I very much was at a point of trying to recollect what I have done and give it a more purposeful direction. It was not just an accident that I have already been focusing my work, my academic work and creative work on media archaeology. To just take two of the biggest names that everyone would know, I think Zelinsky's contribution for me is the idea of connecting models, machines, technologies, and accidents. And he cited Deleuze, which is also a very important theorist of mine. And this quote was important to me. Looking at hidden ideas, false but inspiring paths of earlier experimental art or experiments. I suppose all the entire positive histories we have always been learning in our education are histories of success. But I think Deleuze's idea pointed us to those killed histories of failure, and those trials that had major impact, though they were not being remembered anymore. The last one is about my other projects, but I'm not going to talk about it, but it's about really looking at the raw material that has driven technological advancement. But I think this one is actually important now when we think of, if we try to draw a map about the computers and the cell phones that they are using, draw a world map, and where all the ingredients were, all the minerals were from, which is on the list on the lower side. You can draw a pretty big map from around the world. So this kind of obsession, my obsession with raw material, is not just for the sake of obsession. It has a lot of sense, and this is tied to geopolitics, among other things. The machine, the dream machine that I just showed you as images and also as a more scientific sketch and a very sketchy sketch, comes from this exhibition, which is the 20th anniversary of the School of Creative Media. And here you can see that I include both non-programming work and also AI work. But the point is more to make science more visible, and also all the artists were required to show diagrams and sketches and an explanation before people walk into the work to look at them. Here are just four sketches. Upper left-hand side is the work, Dream Machine. In the background is a big map that I created, going all the way back to several million years of human history, to say that science has walked through a long journey, and this exhibition in front of us with the 12 works, they pointed at very different incentives. Right-hand side top, a work that was made with keen knowledge, interest in chemicals, chemistry, and physics. Again, an artist who worked with scientists. Lower left-hand side, a very famous work by a Japanese artist. But this work's fascination is it is totally mechanical, and there is no programming in it. And yet, the kind of cybernetic and generative power was obvious. Lower right-hand side, just a sample of a series of work that I curated, which was based on 4 episodes based on sci-fi, science fiction, by a famous Taiwan scientist who is now in the US for good. Started to think of not only virtual connectivity or networks, but real networks and real communities. Thus, my first trial, and with Jockey Club's grant, created an online platform. There are actually 5 issues, not just 2. It was recognized by Ars Electronica this year. We are very, very lucky to be recognized. But I think this was a very strange community because it's open call. We have people from different corners of the world. If I look at Hong Kong as a center, those corners can be Europe, okay? And also, I was very worried about people who did not get selected. So we actually had 2 sections of online conversations with submitters whose work had not been selected, so as to keep everybody on track of a conversation. So more or less, I have painted the picture of how I arrived at P2P as a historian, as an artist, as someone in the field, as a curious human being, and also because of my transdisciplinary art practices, which turned me into a materialist anthropologist. Oh, sorry, it should be anthropologist. Materialist anthropology is a term from Horkheimer, from the Frankfurt School, old school, I know. But this idea of networking, making community, is for me really about making things together, or reading together, or writing poetry together, or discussing issues together that may or may not be attractive to a much larger community out there, and research learning community. And also this whole line of thinking invoked a very important note on how to study together via P2P in order to secure a very safe space, in the belief that we are all in need of more informed criticality. And P2P has often been talked about by people who are doing Bitcoin. But I think maybe instead of just being a smart consumer, can we be a critical participant user? Of course, throughout this entire process, I have been teaching this class called Critical Theory and Socially Engaged Art. So my investigation into participatory art had a strong influence in justifying or consolidating my thinking. Left-hand side, the more old school kind of participation, Bertolt Brecht, cinema, Godard, to Annette Kuhn's family photo reading, to the very right-hand side, they became something very different. For example, on the right-hand side, lower is Ai Weiwei's 2007 work, bringing over 1,000 Chinese persons to document those people who had never left the country. I was also thinking of the person who is like dancing, Yvonne Rainer, is basically a networking work because she did it in order to encourage everyone to dance. But this was being handed over to many, many generations. This work was from the 1960s. Even today, if you Google her and this work, there are still people repeating the work. So this is the kind of, on a temporal, on a chronological level, something handed on. But there may be new things we can do. Upper right-hand corner, Jo Spence, someone who was never recognized in her lifetime until after she died of cancer. She spent a lot of time documenting her own cancer, her own illness, and also the way public communication discourses had confined and defined how we get cure. And later on, she turned these exercises of making documentary photographs to speak into a series of workshops called What Do Women Do with Their Camera? Hey, I can't move. Yes. So at this point, I think here is another thought that might very importantly wrap up what I'm thinking. I think why are we so obsessed with making communities and setting up networks? I think the term episteme, which is to be differentiated from the idea of knowledge in English translation, is very important, because one of the reasons why we want to get together as a network, as a community, as a kind of mobile and dynamic community, is to learn about the implicit rules of formation of things that seems to be established knowledge for us, and especially for a particular cultural milieu. And this quote was very important to me. They are the underlying codes of culture that, sorry, I can't move something here. So I cannot see the underlying codes of a culture that goes beyond language. It's logic, it's schemas of perception, it's values, etc., etc. And so this is why I think having community is such an easy thing to say at this point. But from my point of view, maybe some of us, not all of us, should think of how to maximize this kind of new technology to make sure that the new communities can be as small as they can, but they could be as powerful and outreaching extensively as they could be. So these are the steps summarizing. I'm towards the end now. And so I think I'm trying to make a documentation, an ethnography of myself walking through this journey. And all of this point to the fact that it is a very timely moment for me to step into asking the experts around the table today to teach me, to give me some insights of what to do. Maybe I can read the last few lines. I teach several courses and I do my own work and I make communities. And especially when my courses are making people make art, I felt a very strong need to preserve and disseminate their unusual practice. And here is a quote that I felt very much touching me that I heard recently, which is to say that a lot of the history we are reading right now, the media art history or art history we are reading now, is defined and delimited by institutional practices of collection or collecting. You can say that. So what about thinking about distribution as education? What about thinking about forming archives as a regular practice? And what about trying to tackle the preservation of works in a time when there are a lot of surveillance control about what we can say, what we can't say, what is legitimate, what is not legitimate. So this excitement of showcasing magic, even for very small group focused learning, for me is a very relevant moment to step into P2P. So, of course, going back to the very first example of my own first work, digital work, I really think that it will be so much my luck if I can revisit those works and redo them and form new communities, so we can open up this kind of open creativity platform to ensure more of us are there. Of course, when we think of P2P, we think of local networks, but I'm not sure if I'm actually thinking of that. So I'm thinking about local, global, as well as local networks and how that is possible. My very humble research is that it may be possible because to me, the easiest way to imagine what P2P means is the AirDrop function in Apple via Bluetooth. But I'm sure there is more. And I also read somewhere that a lot of the back end of the apps we are using every day are actually available. I can be turned into something to serve the P2P platform. And also how to use blockchain has become a major question of how to everyone own a pocket, and this pocket can, like a wallet, this wallet can contain coins, values, monetary values, as well as artworks and knowledge, and how this has to be turned into a consideration of how to understand the episteme of the time. So I think I should leave here. I think my other colleagues will take up from here. Just to mention that P2P is the diagram on the left-hand side, not the one on the right-hand side, with a central sharing, a central server governing, but it's more point-to-point. Okay, I think I have said enough.
Yeah, thanks, Linda, for a very rich personal but also public trajectory sharing of how art tech came to manifest in Hong Kong context and also Hong Kong pedagogy. We do have audience raised up their hand. I'm not sure, is there a question? Feel free to turn on the mic and ask the question. There's an audience with a watermelon profile. Is that, do you want to ask the question? Feel free to post also on the Zoom chat. Meanwhile, we do have questions on Slido. There's one question, maybe, yeah, I think April shared it on the Zoom chat box. A question from a very strong tone, anonymous as Love Light Generator, is, they say, Dr. Linda, I think maybe a translated question. Am I a symbol of failure of straight people expressing and communicating about love? And what is the emotion side of your electronic literature practices? Thanks. Do you want to give a brief discussion of this question?
So is this question about why the things I talk about are so mechanical and so dry and cold? Is that the question? And whether maybe. I have feelings?
I think they phrase it in a playful way also.
Yeah. I mean, I cannot assure anyone that I have feelings, but I do. And I'm trained also as a more traditional kind of art lover. And so when I turned myself into an artist, I was very much bringing into my pocket everything that art means. And I think art cannot be art if it's just data visualization. Art cannot be art if art is only there to make things look prettier or look more fashionable. Art, to me, basically, is radical thinking. And radical thinking embodies a lot of things, including giving deeper thought into what it means to experience the world. How about moving away from our popular culture in which emotions have to be presented by an adjective in a very summative way? What about breaking down emotions? So I think there is no contradiction between thinking of a word that is infinitely growing and being able to, at various points, put your emotions into it. There's no time, but if you look at the digital poetry, because there was a lot of planning in what lines to put into the box. Maybe I can go back to that box. It is not totally like neutral. In the middle box, there were sentences I have already carefully thought about, although I don't know to what purpose, to what end, but I put them there. But I put them there and also encourage people to look at these lines that were already there. They were kind of, they carry a kind of madness and a kind of freedom, sense of freedom. So maybe that is good. If they look at it, they can do something very different. Or I can tell you, there were people who wrote foul language for sure when you are doing a work like that. And but most of the people who did the work, they were very much understanding the game. And sometimes feelings don't need to be made explicit. Sometimes it's in the sound, in the sounding of the words. So I don't know if I'm answering this question, but if you worry about me, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I think maybe just one more question. It's also
Yes.
from Slido. Yeah, this question in Chinese. I'm going to read in Chinese.
Okay.
他问您的项目是通过艺术的方式阐释科学原理，或将 Art Tech 作为方法论，以达到教育或连结社群的目的吗？
I don't think I want to pin down on art, therefore technology, or technology, therefore art. One of my earlier slides will suggest that this is a very important beginning of my research and my thinking of my own relationship with tools. I think art from the very beginning cannot be isolated from the tools they are using. And every good piece of artwork, they are powerfully reaching out to us. They do so through the technological construct that has reopened up the language of that originary emotions or thought that they have. So for the exhibition that I did, I can say that, yeah, this is something I did not explain enough about. I was thinking whether art and science are actually sharing a lot of commonalities. That is to say, they both allow hypothetical thinking, although each science and art takes hypothetical thinking to a very different end. Imagination is very important to the scientists as well as to the artists. And also here, I was really not saying that I know what I'm doing. I'm just trying out. So there are many things I'm trying out in shoveling in algorithmic arts, this exhibition. One is to see who is an artist. So I try to tell myself, can you go and only find those artists who are actually studying science and now they're an artist? And I found them. Are there people who are actually very interested in science, but they never really study science, but they think they can, and there's a basic understanding of science as general knowledge? And I found them. Is technology necessarily the applied end of science? Can science become a different kind of narrative that could be turned into an artistic narrative? So I was asking a lot of questions, but I got a lot of very cool answers. So I don't think I like, in fact, to phrase the relationship between art and technology that way, as one serving the other. They are together. And I think at the back of my mind, I always think if one thing has to change, is that we should change our primary school education and our secondary school education, because it was there when we were told we have to choose one out of two. And then when we come back to study media art, oh my God, there's so many things I have, lost track of. The cues are gone, and I have to reconsider what kind of a human being I am. It is very tough, I have to say. It is tough. It's very, very tough. But I don't understand why we grew up to enter university or college life, and we started to think that I only belong to this and not to that. To me, more and more I think about it, more and more I think it doesn't make sense. And we're not going to survive like that in contemporary society.
Thanks, Linda, for your patient and generous answers.
No, I just hope I can answer those questions better.
Yes, definitely. I think we can still do more discussion towards the end of panel. And let's now invite our second panelist. Let me introduce Winnie Sun. Winnie Sun is an artistic coder and scholar who was born and raised in Hong Kong. Their practice and research intersects with art and technology in the context of computational cultures, engaging with topics like free and open source culture, coding otherwise, artistic tech manuals, civic technologies, and minor technology. They are currently working as associate professor at Aarhus University and visiting researcher at the Center of the Study of the Network Image, London South Bank University. Okay, welcome, Winnie, to being your presentation.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, joining this panel, but also thanks, Simu, your organizing this amazing panel so that I have a chance to also learn from one another. Also, it's really nice seeing you, Linda, sort of like a historical trajectory of the development of the media scene in Hong Kong is so familiar, but it's also very, give me some groundwork for my presentation, I think, in a good way. So I'm going to share my screen right now. So can you all see some sort of yellow thing on the screen?
Yes,
right.
Good.
Okay, great. I hope I will be on time, but let me put up my timer. All right. So as everyone know, my name is Winnie Sun. I'm born and raised in Hong Kong, but I think it's also quite important to also think about the subject position as well. So I'm currently resides and work in London, and I have been living and working in Europe for 8 years, and during which also observing the change in Hong Kong, both gradually and rapidly from a distance, and reflecting on my own subject position and identity politics as well. Because I think this background is sort of quite important in a way on how my work also changed along the way, too, that I'm going to share with you today with my two works. I will talk about two community or art or whatever, whether it's art or not is not really important, but two works of mine, but they are both collaborative works around civic communities and open platforms. So in the last couple of years, I have been working closely with the community and people in Taiwan in particular. So I think the reason is possibly because we share similar struggles, both in terms of colonialism and also threats in terms of political environment that we are facing. So for me, it's also a way to think about how we might able to build solidarity networks across regions. All right. So since our panel is around peer-to-peer, so we need a starting point. So this is a very simple description from Wikipedia focusing on peer-to-peer in the context of computer networks, right? But I want to expand the way of peer-to-peer networks to include more human participation, but also keeping some kinds of essence around peer-to-peers. Things like the notion of resources. What does it mean by resource? And also Linda, towards the end of her presentation, also mentioned about without the centralized server. So the other strengths of peer-to-peer is also about without the need of central coordination or centralization. This is also related to power distribution as well. And then thirdly, the characteristics of peer-to-peer that I want to expand is the peers are both suppliers and consumers of resources. So in media studies, people might say this is called like prosumers. So the person can be both producing and also at the same time consuming as well. So it is just a departure point, right? Something to kickstart with, right? So departing from the so-called definition, and the essence of peer-to-peer networks that I have highlighted. So the two works that I'm going to talk about are focusing on the agency of users, community building, decentralization of power. But to achieve this, my way of working, I just want to flesh out maybe my assumption or my way of working is highly influenced by free and open source culture. The belief of greater access to information and knowledge to have far-reaching social and economic benefits. And it speaks to the matter of access, distribution, reuse, and attribution. So for me, it is fundamentally political because it's questions about individuality, questioning the self, as well as enabling the sharing and responsibility. So the first project that I want to talk about is called Folkonomy, which is a project that I have worked with a Taiwanese artist, Li Jitong, in the last 3 years. So the project is guided by speculative questions. How to buy, how to own, how to mint 1 milliliter of the ocean from the South China Sea. Right. This image that you saw on the screen right now kind of show you the complexity of the sea, politics around it. And of course, it's not just only about territory claimings, but also the underlying seawater in relation to natural resources. So these come back to the question of what is resources and how do we see resources and where is the power dynamics around the resources. Right? So the South China Sea, perhaps some of us or many of us here in this room kind of know that it's one of the world's most heavily trafficked waterways for international trade. But it is also one of the most disputable sea areas in the world over the territorial claims spanning across Brunei, China, Malaysia, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Vietnam. Right? So in addition, multiple Asian governments assert sovereignty, not just only about the sea, the territory of the sea, but also over the rocks, reefs, as well as other geographical features and undersea missions. This oceanic object, you might think it's sea, it's kind of material, but it's very material. And it gets significant military and political. If we imagine boundaries were not dotted lines on the map or imaginary lines in the ocean to compete for colonial power, but to think about them as making and maintaining keen connections to respect one another, including traditions and histories, then how might we queer the South China Sea otherwise? So this is an image of an installation and workshop setting in Taiwan that Jitong and I, as part of the project, we kind of pirate the South China Sea. We took the water as a way to think about questions in relation to resources and ownership. So in the previous setup, we had the video on the left-hand side that showcased the process of pirating the water from the southern part of Taiwan to Taipei, the venue. And now I actually got some of it in London and going to bring it to Sweden next week. And then not just only about bringing the water to the exhibition venue with the jars, but also the measuring device. You can see the measuring. At the center of the work, you can see there was a carpet, the blue carpet. So we hold workshops there where we invite artists, technologies, biologists, environmentalists, activists to join our discussion around what is the meaning of buying or owning 1 milliliter of the South China Sea. So why we want to choose this pirated and figurative object? First of all, it is a very geopolitical site, not only about territorial claims and sovereignty issues, but it's also about natural resources, trading, international relations, as well as world power struggles. And this also helped us to think about indigenous issues, such as how is it the rights of using the land, the rights of using the sea, and how where's the ownership and also the contract between the states and the people, right? So how may we think about the sea slightly different? And that leads to what it means by common resources. Can common resources be bought, be owned, and managed differently? So in that sense, like using these pirated objects as the South China Sea allow us to explore the notion of commoning beyond privatized and state-owned property. So there were 3 versions that we had developed together over the last 3 years. In version 1, we discussed with the participants around the code of conduct, especially in terms of the concerns of the sea, what forms of ownership that they would like to imagine to own the sea differently, and what kind of contract they would like to engage with, and what forms of responsibility they would like to perform, right? And they would like to speculate to use the water resource, right? As well as also we were pricing the 1 milliliter of the water. So we did a survey with the participants and calculated average price, what people are willing to pay and own 1 milliliter of the water. So the process was very much driven by discussion, such as the concerns of the sea, who should own the sea, how to manage the sea, what was the share values, and we did the co-writing of code of conduct and also contract. In version 2, we put 1 milliliter of water on the blockchain network based on the agreed ownership type, which was co-op. We also had another one because we hold 2 workshops in Taiwan before. One was private owned, one was a co-op. But we put the co-op one on the NFT. And the agreed price is something around like 40 cents Hong Kong dollars, like 0.5 euro per 1 milliliter, which I'm going to talk more for the next slide. So both version 1 and 2 were exhibited in Taiwan. And this year, in the summertime, we were being invited to give a workshop and exhibiting our work in South Korea. So to build on what we have done in Taiwan, we think it is a good context for us to expand the topic to wider audiences. Although South Korea is not directly involved or claims the ownership of the South China Sea, the workshop discussion also helps kind of like exchange ideas about their sea and their territorial problems and understand other Asia power dynamics in that region. And of course, to build solidarity across networks. So as I mentioned earlier, we have put up something on the blockchain network as an NFT. We are also very cautious about how the NFT economy promote privatized assets within the capitalistic logics. So as we know, the essence of NFT is about certificate to prove that it is a unique asset, right? The so-called non-fungible token. So as an artist, we want to challenge this idea. So instead of using usual digital assets like an image that we commonly see on the NFT or blockchain network, or a video as a digital access, so we made a contract. We made a contract, which means that they are the owner, they are the co-owner of the 1 milliliter of the South China Sea. So which means by buying 1 milliliter of water, you are entering a contractual relationship with the set price that I mentioned, like around 40 cents per 1 milliliter. And also, like you agree to the particular ownership type that is co-owned, and also you agree to sort of perform some sort of responsibility to maintain the sea. So the contract was written in 3 versions, the English one, the traditional Chinese, as well as a computer code, which is written in Bash, and it is executable. So first, instead of providing limited edition, which is normally we see the NFT in the market, like first edition, limited 10 edition, and so on. So we deliberately want to provide unlimited edition. So the first trial, we had like the 10,000 editions that we list. And the idea behind is that the ongoing royalty fees will continue to contribute to the unlimited edition creation. Right? So, but to put simply, more editions, more water owners, right? So for those who bought the water, they are part of the South China Sea Preparation Committee to discuss natural resources, responsibilities, and how to maintain the sea. So our vision is that if the sea is a common resource, what if we have millions, thousands of people worldwide owning 1 or more milliliter of water? How might that change the current discourse of the South China Sea? What might be the agency of owners? How can it open up the thinking around territories? So Forkonomy, the project name called Forkonomy, which is borrowing the idea of forking and economy. So forking in software development, taking the resource and create a different paradigm, create a different, like software, like you take in some of the source code and then you modify and then you create something new, right? So in this project, we are interested in rethinking the politics of our contemporary economic and technical cultural systems. So by employing free and open source software and decentralized protocols, we set the participatory project as a commoning ship for people of the Pacific who want to queer and care the matters of hierarchies, ownerships, gender labor division, as well as to fight against the constant threats of maintaining a high degree of autonomy regarding the land and the sea. So the 3 versions that we have progressed so far sort of leave us questions, which is how can the South China Sea be co-managed by the people around the world, be nations? So again, this is a speculative artwork, asking what if scenarios as a way to enter a different conversation around ownership, as well as to think from a sea's perspective. So that's sort of the first work. I hope sort of like give you a sense of like some of the topics that Linda mentioned about like participatory, free and open source. What does it mean by a network? But I guess sort of like I give you a concrete example to go into deep in terms of how we use technologies and how we think about peer-to-peer network as a way to imagine things differently. So the second project that I want to talk about is the Free and Open Access Static Programming, a handbook of software studies. This is a book that I have co-written with Jeff Cox. It is kind of an introduction to the book, but it also explores technical as well as cultural imaginations of programming. So it follows the principle that the growing importance of software requires a new kind of cultural thinking and curriculum, not just only about Python for dummies or JavaScript for dummies, and with which to better understand the politics and procedures, the process, and the direction. So the book takes a very particular interest in power relations that are relatively under-acknowledged in technical studies concerning class and capitalism, gender and sexuality, as well as race and the legacies of colonialism. So long story short, the book is about programming, weaving in critical theories, critical practice, and reflecting beyond human applications for functional use in industry. So for this specific focus on peer-to-peer platforms. So I want to focus not the content of the book, but the publishing strategy of this book as a peer-to-peer project. So the image here shows sort of like the multiple instances of peer, including a website, which is at the background, which has all the content, but then anyone can also like, we have installed like a different web wedges so that you can also run the code online and editing the code and so on. But then also on the right-hand side of your screen is a physical book as well that one can buy in the bookstores at a very reasonable price, and also with a downloadable PDF. And on the left-hand side, the smaller screen size, which is software repository. And this is what I want to focus for this project.
Sorry, Winnie, just suggestion, because the interpreter cannot hear your sound very clear when you put your head down. I think there's some signal distortion. I was hearing also. So maybe there's some position. It sounds better.
Is it better now?
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Thank you.
Okay. Just let me know if there's issue. I can readjust again, right? Shall I continue?
Yes, please. Now it's good.
It's all right. Okay. So the previous slide, I show you like a different screens, like a different multiple formats of the book aesthetic programming. And this is the version that I want to focus, or the format that I want to focus, which is the Git repository. So Jeff and I have put up our sketchy and polished draft on GitLab. You can say draft as like writing, like the text, the content, right? So what is Git or GitLab, which is a software version management system, sort of like when you update the code, then you will have one version and people can fork it, download it, and also make a new version according to, like, of course, your software license as well. So for me, writing a book is just like writing a piece of software, also with different versioning. So it's not just only about the content itself, but also the scripts that we have written in a way to generate the book as a PDF, as well as the website in the HTML format. So all the text was written in Markdown file format, which is a specific plain text file format, something like Word document or text file, but adding computational syntax as well, which is the markup language. And the contents can be converted to structure layout for different mediums, such as web and also print presentation as well. So Markdown is designed to make it easy to read and also to write. So this Markdown format allow us to easily convert to different file formats. So this is sort of like we store everything on the Git repository, and every chapter is a Markdown. So there's some kinds of specific syntax that is easily to export to different multiple outputs. And on the lower side of the screen is like the installation procedures of how one can compile or modify or fork the repository and then change their content and then to generate their book, generate a website. So everything is open access in this sense. So as I mentioned earlier, for me, it's like writing a book is like writing a piece of software. The book is written on GitLab that I have shown you. It is widely available and it is offered in multiple formats. But what we see is that this is also a book as a computational object that is open for modification and also reversioning. The book was written in a very particular situated context where Jeff and I were both in Europe, and also a lot of examples and references are also coming from the histories in the European Westernized knowledge in that sense. And we hope that people would fork it, change it, add a chapter, and modify the content with their own examples. So we have received merge requests of the book, helping us to fix some of the errors, which we don't know this person. Participants involved in many different ways. It is like, like fixing a book as if fixing a piece of software. So this person identified there were some description problems of some of the pages, and then he modified and then submit a merge request so that it can merge it back to the aesthetic programming book by using the Git repository, the GitLab platform. Right. So to reiterate, perhaps more related to the central theme of the panel today about peer-to-peer network and decentralization of power, we can also think about decentralization in terms of authorship, which is something I will talk more. But the idea for this book is having a very clear intention, which is for readers to adapt, to modify, and rearrange the contents to suit their purposes and their particularity of the context in which they work. So our contents are offered as an open resource, right, to open up different possibilities for making cuts across the various materials and ideas, and to encourage readers to fork a copy and customize their own versions with different references, examples, reflections, and new chapters, for example, for further modification and reuse. So last year, the book was forked by Sarah Siston and Mark Marino. They have added a new chapter called Talking Back, and also with additional sessions, which is sort of like expand our book, I would say. The resource is distributed on their GitLab platform. These examples also opens up the radical transformation of publishing. How might we rethink publishing using peer-to-peer networks with the essence of free and open source software? So currently, Jeff and I are now working with Taiwanese arts and coding communities about the translation of this book. So we are going to collaborate with Digital Arts Center in Taipei and Simoy Culture, the publisher in Taiwan. So we plan to have a series of workshops to work on the translation of the book. So this is the image that like different community members in Taiwan trying to use the platform called HackMD, which is again another collaborative, like something like Google Doc, but it's an open source tool. It's very popular as a civic technology in Taiwan context. So the community is also trying to, translate the book, not just only one single translator, but multiple, right? And of course, during the translation, there are a lot of different issues, like whether this is the right one or whether we should follow strictly to the original authors, So there are some kinds of politics open up through this process. So what we are planning to do is to have a series of workshops to work on the translation of the book, to involve situated knowledge, communities that they can add their own examples, they can change their references. But the core idea is instead of, usual translation processes, like I publish the book and then the publisher will find a translator and then to translate the whole book. And then towards the end, the translator or the publisher will give you, hey, this is the translated version, and then we sell it, right? So the idea behind for this project is to involve local communities, take it slower, take more steps, more complicated, more arguments, but that's the point. To fork a different version of the book that is more suitable to the specific context and learning environment. So, as I mentioned, the process of this translation takes much slower than the usual translation process because it involves community building. It involves consensus among different participants or communities that they think it should be relevant. Even just to give you an example, the notion of queer that we use in the book is also having a very different connotation in Asia, and also not just any parts of Asia. Queer in Hong Kong, queer in Taiwan, queer in China is also very differently interpreted as well, right? So there's a lot of hopefully will be more discussion around the problem of translation. So this comes to some of the issues around the politics of translation that I briefly mentioned earlier, is whether it should follow the original author, the power, the central power of the authorship, or translation can be understood as something that is like an adaptation or even a reversioning of the text, right? So we are interested, so Jeff and I are interested to see how the book emerged through this kind of peer-to-peer networks, and also decentralization of the authors. And of course, it's like how much people will take it on to adapt, and also to reverse or to produce a reversioning of the book differently. Right? So we hope the book will speak to the situated context and also other forms of knowledge production. And this form of translation of the book also involve, as I mentioned, local communities as a collective effort. My last slide, sort of like an ending. So the two projects, very different examples that I have show you today, is a way to open up the notion of distributed networks, especially some of the platforms that I have mentioned, such as blockchain, GitLab, or HackMD, or even for these slides, I'm using HackMD to produce the slide with Markdown as well. And the ideas around forking, which is borrowed from free and open source culture. So more importantly is how these peer-to-peer networks help us to rethink the agency of users as a way to critique power asymmetrics. What might be other ways of decentralizing power and allow things to emerge otherwise? So other question is around community building and how to establish alliances locally and globally across boundaries. So thank you for listening. Hope to hear some of your questions.
Thank you, Winnie, very much for providing us two very concrete our projects, how you use P2P and open source tools in the forking and querying way to dialogue with very complex geopolitics issues and knowledge production. I do have actually a very immediate question, because while I was reading your South China Sea NFT project, I see you're choosing co-op like in a very conscious choice instead of using the DAO, like the non-autonomous organization, decentralized autonomous organization, which actually appear a lot in the previous panels. So I'm just curious, what's the decision behind using a co-op, not a DAO?
Well, this is actually our next direction. So this one is just only for the sort of like selling of the contract, like 1 milliliter of the water. The idea is to gather more people, I would say, to gather more ownerships to participate in the preparation committee. So what Zitong and I are planning to do for next phase is using DAO in order to make decisions using the peer-to-peer network. For example, like, I'm one of the owner of 1 milliliter of the water. Can I resell my 1 milliliter of water to Linda? So how do I actually use the water with Linda and with other peoples? How should I enable or collaborate with other water owners to use and to challenge the way of how we think about the water? So this is the next step that we are going to develop using DAO to make collective decisions and to to sort of drive the project to the next stage.
Thank you. There's answer question now in Slido. I would just read it while I think April can help me post in Zoom. So it's in Chinese. I'm going to read in Mandarin. Okay, it's in the chat box. So, 想问一下 Winnie 关于南海的项目，关于这种对海域化的
South China Sea. So it seems that everybody wants to divide the sea in this way, but in a certain extent, we cannot change it in a real manner. And so it's like the project, it's like a little game to do the simulation. But how can you make this kind of a form of attempt be really effective?
I want to respond to this. Actually, from our experience with the participants, not actually everyone want to have it as a co-op. Some of them, they actually want it to be stay-on because you don't have to deal with the complexity, Someone make decision for you, give you instructions, and then you just do it, right? So I guess it's one of the way having this kind of speculative project is also to understand like different types of ownerships and as well as your responsibility, right? So as I mentioned earlier, like this is sort of like a speculative project. So of course, it depends on what you mean by change, right? Do you mean that like you are actually changing the ownership? You want to talk to Vietnam, talk to Philippines, talk to China and Taiwan in order to reclaim the territory, right? This is the scope of this project. This is what do you mean by change in that sense? Or change in terms of like we think about how we might think about the maps, how we might think about the territories, how we can develop collective efforts, how we can build solidarity networks, not just only on the South China Sea issue, but also many kinds of other things as well, right? So because I think it's also one of the assumptions when we talk about the South China Sea is a lot of time we tend to be silent because it's so political and so sensitive. And you feel you don't have the agency to influence any other things, right? But the interesting thing about speculative art or artwork is you provide a platform and also like by using participatory methods, you are bringing together people who are from really different backgrounds, who are biologists, who are policymakers, who are artists and activists. And what are the concerns about the ownership of the seas? And if they can able to manage it, so do they want to manage it? What are the things that they need to manage? What are the care that they need to perform in order to do it? So I think it's also a process of we thinking about like, or maybe actually we don't want to do anything. We just want the state to handle it for us, you know? So if you actually want to do co-own, right? Co-ownership, you need to put in effort. Are you willing to put this effort? How much you can give? What kind of responsibility that you can take? But it's not just only about this project. I mean, the South China Sea. It's also like other kinds of things, like other software communities, and also like different projects can sort of help us to bring this issue also to a wider context. Also the threats. Also Taiwan and Hong Kong sort of like share different kinds of or similar pain, I would say, or backgrounds or struggles. So in a way, a change is also in terms of like when we did the workshop in South Korea, there were a lot of people share their concern with us about their sea. But their sea is not the South China Sea, it's the Japanese Sea. They unfold their tension between South Korea and Japan, you know. So in a way, there's also a form of exchange through dialogues and also think about how we might establish different kinds of network differently. Would that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks, Winnie. Definitely we can discuss more about speculative art projects and I think multiple impacts towards the later discussion section. So now let's move to our third speaker, Display Distribute. Described on their website, Display Distribute is a now and again exhibition space, distribution service, thematic inquiry, and sometimes shop founded in Kulong, Hong Kong. Among several recent inquiries into the illicit movement of goods and people by Display Distribute, the Light Logistics project operates as a burgeoning distribution platform and travelogue in service of the channels between readers and semi-autonomous publishers from East and Southeast Asia. Now we will have Elaine Hall, the co-conspirator of Display Distribute, and who was named Light Logistics August 2016 Courier of the Month, to share more about their Not in Time Ultra Circulation project. So thank you, Elaine. The stage is yours.
Hello, just a moment. I share the screen. Okay, can you see this now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I wanted to start with thank you very much to Zmu and all the organizers. I feel a little bit humbled actually to participate in this panel because I have to say the work that we do is much less technically proficient than some of the new media work that has already been presented today. And I think you'll see that later when I talk more in depth about the logistics project of how it demonstrates to a certain degree certain failures of the project, although I think it does speak a bit about the precarity of our work as kind of freelance workers and artist workers in a very sort of exploitative art system today. But I wanted to start first. Let me see. Okay. So I wanted to start first by maybe a roundabout explanation of the title of my talk, which was Ultra Circulation as Form. And this kind of came about very spontaneously because Ming Lin, one of my collaborators, and I gave a talk in 2020 called Circulation as Form. And this is a very key concept for a lot of the work that we do. And thinking about the ultra, I wanted to sort of go on a little derive, reflecting on the poster for this particular talk, which I found quite funny in a way. I was struck by this phrase, "Never mind the global, here is Hong Kong." And no offense intended to the graphic designer, and I'm not actually sure if this poster was translated for all of the cities involved in the panel. But of course, the immediate relationship for those of you who are familiar with punk music would be this album from the Sex Pistols, which I think came out in 1977. So this translation of "Never mind the global" or "Never mind the bollocks" from "Never mind the global," for me, casts already a sort of question mark as far as what is this equation between global and bollocks. And bollocks, for those of you also who don't know, is a sort of British English term for balls or testicles. And to say "never mind this" in the context of Hong Kong is again a big raised eyebrow for me, because it's a question if we are casting out the role of the global in terms of how we identify Hong Kong today, or does that establish like a different relationship, of course, then between Hong Kong or Hong Kong's relationship to the mainland? Does it mean that Hong Kong is punk? Is Hong Kong the punk sort of representative of China these days? So maybe that in a way becomes the translating lead-in to where Display Distributes work has entered. And our collective sort of started in 2015 with exactly an interest in these kind of punk sort of maneuvers that established the relationship between Hong Kong and the mainland. And that is exactly, for me, a sort of negation of this question of what is the global or international identity of Hong Kong, which is completely unable to be separated from what Hong Kong is, I think, both in terms of Hong Kong being a colonial city, but also, of course, being a tax haven, an entrepot, and place exactly where things are constantly in movement. And so our work in 2015 simply began, simply began as a sort of research inquiry based on this sort of shop model that exists all over Hong Kong, but also, of course, in many parts of China where, with real estate being so expensive, of course, you will find shops that have not been rented for long-term use being rented out by the day. So that we can maximize any possible use of space for landlords to make money from. And these shops can be rented by the day by simply calling a phone number, checking a website, looking for availability, and calling a phone number. And if you reserve it for 1 day or 3 days, all you need to do is bring your own lock, because it's an empty concrete space. And you bring your own stuff to sell. So you technically can use this space for all sorts of things, but generally, of course, again, examining these relationships of things sort of being pilfered out from the mainland and low-cost goods and the easy way to get rid of them. We're talking mostly about these kind of goods like clothing, mobile phone covers, insurance, anything that needs to be sort of like passed off quickly and easily on the market for everyday passerby. So what we did was began by observing simply this model as a way to examine these flows and the sort of leaks of capital that happen across the border. Our research then, of course, includes parallel trading, and parallel trading as one of the examples of how low-end globalization becomes a form of networking from the bottom up, and where individual tactics have a certain sort of agency amidst globalized forms of production. So this is simply just a little meme that I like to think tells
sorry,
a little
Elaine,
bit.
Are you
Yes?
moving your slides? Because we are not seeing your slide change. It's the first page.
Really?
Yes.
Wait. Oh, wait.
Maybe it's different play mode.
Oh, it says, hold on a second. It says my screen sharing is paused, but how do I unpause it?
Maybe unshare and share again.
Do you see it now?
Yeah, now we see. Sorry, we didn't see the previous one. I thought you were
Where
just on the first
where
page.
did it stop?
It's just on the first page.
Oh no!
We can quickly just show us the image. I think we hear you quite well.
Okay. If I put play. Okay. So you haven't seen this at all?
No.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay. So yes, the Sex Pistols album. I just go back on a little review here. And why I went on this little derive. This is a good opportunity for me to make up because I hate public speaking. I'm very sorry. So I might be a little bit jumpy here. Is back to this question of why ultra. And actually, so I took a little bit from this manifesto for ultra translation from Antenna Group, a collective based, I think, in California, who does a lot of work relating to language justice. And I think actually, so I was quite happy when Winnie brought up about the politics of translation and why circulation as form I want to consider as a possible ultra circulation of form, because I'm thinking about as this quote mentions, the ultra is something beyond, or we can think of it otherwise. And so when does circulation, which we think about as the movement of goods or people, as becoming a sort of totalizing or a structure that organizes people and society itself? There's a really wonderful quote from the literary critic Lauren Berlant that I would like to read to you now. And it says, structure is that which organizes transformation, and infrastructure is that which binds us to the world in movement and keeps the world practically bound to itself. So if we think of circulation as a mode of movement that requires infrastructure in order to enable it, I would like to think then of Display Distribute as a project, and especially the logistics project that I will talk about in a bit, as a kind of form that would like to question otherwise or ultra possibilities for how we organize life itself or society and ourselves.
Sorry,
why does it keep pausing my screen sharing? Sorry. Do you
want to? No,
maybe you just leave it at the Google slide entering page.
Strange. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, maybe don't do full screen. Maybe like this.
Okay, just leave it like this.
It's good.
Okay, so now I went out of order, but let me go backwards now and then, just to give a little bit of background. For one is the interest in, as I mentioned, this anarchic kind of entrepreneurialism that Display Distribute sort of takes its inspiration from. And that includes parallel traders, it includes smugglers, it includes pirates. And the beginnings of my practice, I guess, were with a co-organized artist-run space in Beijing called Home Shop or 家作坊. And that conflation there with home and shop, or 工作坊 and home, 家 or family, is exactly that, a kind of thinking through the blurring of public and private space, or what is work and what is leisure. And this space was located in a storefront in Beijing, and it also served at one point as my home. So this became sort of the very simple flip of the architectures of commerce towards other forms of thinking about socially engaged work, and how, in certain ways, the the commercial space, the store, especially in an environment where the public square is definitely not possible to be known as public, or there are certain freedoms that are not enabled by the public square, then the shopping mall or the store becomes probably the only kind of public space that we know of. So within this space, for the time that we had it, we began engaging in a lot of independent publishing practices, which very naturally kind of came out of the skill base or kind of interests of a lot of the people involved with the space, which include sort of writing, some design, but also more discursive events like workshops and reading groups, poetry readings. And publishing became at the time like a very simple way to translate certain things outside of the immediate environment of the space, which was very small. And also when you have time-based events, of course, there's a very limited audience or limited possibility for people to, outside of that space, to know what's going on or to be able to participate. So in addition to like a community newspaper, we also produced a journal that allowed us to document some of the events that we were doing, as well as give a sort of different media and different format for other people to comment on certain themes that were interesting for us at the time. And with independent publishing, and I think now with a sort of like, what would you call it, a renaissance of zine making that's happening nowadays. I think there's a real interest and sort of consensus that publishing is something that any of us can do. There's a democratization, so to speak, of publishing practices, which I think is really wonderful, that, you know, anybody who doesn't even necessarily have a lot of you don't need so much, or the skills are a lot more accessible nowadays for anyone to sort of make a zine. And at that time, when you start getting into it, you realize, you know, there's a really great joy of printing something and getting it back from the printer. And then you have, you know, these boxes of books with you, and you realize, wow, but how do I share these with other people? That actually becomes the real project. You end up spending so much more time trying to sell your books, trying to share them with people. And this is how Home Shop, as well as my involvement with Display Distribute later, gets sort of our interest, I suppose, starts to move more into thinking about distribution, but also very much about the ecologies of publishing, and not simply about. So the content, of course, of a publication is always important, but what does it do in terms of a socially engaged practice to consider the social life of the book? What is it? How do we consider the relations between producers and readers and publics and makers? So upon my sort of collaboration with Display Distribute in Hong Kong, beginning in 2015, we established we call it a distro, which comes a bit more from anarchist libraries to a certain degree. But we are selling these publications, some our own, but also those of other practitioners based in East and Southeast Asia. And these are kind of, I guess, selected and curated on the basis of our interest in counter-hegemonic practices and in establishing networks and of affinity between other artist-run spaces, independent artists, people who are addressing issues related to things like migrant worker issues or LGBTQ issues, urban redevelopment. And along with establishing this as a network for us to discuss with and share our publications with each other, the question again then of distribution comes up. How do we move these books, especially when a lot of these are very cheap and inexpensive books or zines? It doesn't make any sense for example, you to pay 30 Hong Kong dollars for a zine, but the cost to ship it to Japan or to the US will double or triple the price of the zine. And it also doesn't make sense when the readers of these zines are probably not the type of people who can afford or should be paying that kind of money. We don't need to pass that off to the reader. So we basically established our own network to think through this, which is it's P2P, we call it, but it's actually a very, very stupid system. And I call it stupid because it's just simply relying on circumstance travel of other people that are in this network. And that includes, of course, the other publishers, but people who are interested in our work, and sometimes random people who just discover us online and then think it's interesting and will volunteer because they are traveling. Say, for example, somebody in Beijing orders our publication and they will have to wait. They don't pay any shipping at all, but they have to wait for the book, for someone traveling from Hong Kong to Beijing in order to receive the book. So what we're doing then is sort of imitating or parasiting from this network of travelers, and it's documented in a way that kind of mimics, I'll show you this slide. It's documented in a way that mimics sort of the aesthetics and the language of logistical enterprise like Shunfeng or DHL, something like this. But instead of relying on the efficiencies or the very streamlined A to B of a Shunfeng service, what we are documenting actually is a lot of inefficiency and a lot of extraneous information or metadata that tells a whole different story next to the story that is told by the book itself. And this will include, something simple like, I think in this example here, that the what was it? The story of this one. It was the courier traveled to Liverpool because he went to see a football game, and because he went to see the football game, it was too late by the time he wanted to deliver the book to the location, the delivery that he was supposed to deliver it to. And so he tried simply to stick it in a mail slot in this photo of a Chinese restaurant there, but because the books were too big, it wouldn't fit in the hole. So this caused a further delay in the delivery of this publication. And these are like, in a way, they become like these alternative narratives and mini stories that talk about the circulation and actually establish different relationships between the reader and the courier. Sometimes the courier also is the publisher themselves. So you have the situation several times. Where, for example, the publisher themselves ends up bringing the book to the reader, and this becomes a really nice opportunity then to have a discussion about the publication that would not be able to be had otherwise. So what we are really interested then is expanding then this social life of the book, and friendships are made out of it, honestly, or collaborations come out of it. And this kind of juxtaposition or translation, multiplication of the roles of what we can do when we are publishing. We are not simply makers, but we also become the carriers. We also are the audiences for the work. Tries to think through a sort of bottom-up kind of, how would you say, a bottom-up ecology for what it means to circulate material, but also knowledge practices. Let me see. Where do I go next? Okay. So alongside that question, we had the opportunity on a few occasions to produce a catalog. And this one was produced in 2017. And this particular book, became an exploration very much so of this question of content being conflated with its means of circulation. And what that means is that this book, of course, it has its own content, which will include articles that we have invited other writers to write, but it also becomes a selling device. We use it as a way to share information about the other publications that we are selling. So there are, like a kind of selling catalog. There are price lists. There are descriptions of the author and descriptions of the books, but there are also even scanned pages taken from some of the publications. And this allows, in a way, makes it into a kind of reader's digest or a re-narration of this content in a way as seen through the eye or the perspective of display distribute. And it offers itself as a circulating device that tells a story of these kind of counter-hegemonic practices and their relationships with one another. And this is just a kind of also funny aside of the way in which we sort of have presented this project, because so you see the boxes in the middle. We had the opportunity to participate in a festival in Berlin, and we basically used this as the launch event for this catalog that appeared. So this sort of, in a way, of course, to reference to the Kuaidi station or relay center, is basically the question for us always of node-to-node movement. And the irony of this is that 1 week, I think it was, after this festival at Hamburger Bahnhof, there was a book fair that we were also able to participate in. And so our project actually ended up to be asking them if we can use the space from one event to the next, which includes, of course, the few days in between the book fair and the festival where there was nothing happening. So we basically usurped the space in the same way that actually the 展销场 kind of shop fronts in Hong Kong think of space as like rental units or pop-ups. And it became it was a little bit of a joke for us to say that we ended up with a few days of a solo show at Hamburger Bahnhof. But in reality, of course, this is really very much about sort of the usurping of space and pirating as a way to actually not to think of space itself, but to think of the movement and the maneuvering. And I don't know, just to reflect a little bit about some things that Linda was talking about, I think also very much in our lack of ability to make this a more sort of ideal project in terms of its technical capacity. I would say that we are thinking of the way of maneuvering as the tool itself for producing this as an art project. And I say its lack of technical capacity is because this website, we call it a P2P, and I think it's really our ambition to make this a bit more decentralized as a project. But unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the technical capacity to do it as decentralized as we would like it to be. And that actually speaks very much about these artistic labor production processes that we're kind of implicated in most of the time. And then, for example, with the publications that we produce, these publications, we don't necessarily, as a sort of self-organized project, we don't have the money or the funding to print any more publications on a regular basis. And yet, so we're reliant on these kind of commissions from art projects in order to be able to do so. So with this project that happened at Parasite a few years ago, we had that opportunity by virtue of saying to them that we will combine our publication with the catalog for the art exhibition as a publication for us. So in this way, we're hijacking the art publication as a way to create our own publication. And what we did here in this case was actually the extended story of this is that we discovered upon the invitation of participating in this exhibition, we found out that Parasite, a very curious G4S logo had appeared on the Parasite exhibition catalog for a previous exhibition. And this was very strange to us because G4S is actually a securities company, multinational securities company that is responsible for a lot of very questionable practices, including violence with refugee and asylum seeker centers around the world. Also security violence in relation to their work with the London Olympics. And so we're wondering, why is there this G4S company appearing in relation to Parasite, which is an art space in Hong Kong? And upon further investigation, we find out that G4S is also, along with their multinational kind of securities work, engaged in art handling or art logistics. So they have storage facilities around the world. And as part of their sponsorship of and promotion, I suppose, of their sort of cultural worldliness as a corporate company, they offer to do the logistics for one of these Parasite exhibitions. And part of our protest of this relationship then was to offer to Parasite, well, why don't you stop working with G4S and let us do the logistics for you? So that became our project for the exhibition, was to transport the artworks for this particular bicycle thief show from, I think it was around 12, 14 artists, ranging from going from New York to Hong Kong, Shanghai, also Belgium. And miraculously, we ended up being able to do this. These are some of the sort of references for the logistics via our own network to have them moved to Hong Kong. And these were all documented then in this publication that we made, which also doubly served as the catalog for the book. One other project, I don't have so many photos, but this project, which is the previous catalog, also wanted to explore this possibility of publishing as a more sort of embodied and less material, I would say, process of knowledge production. So what we did here was actually, we never printed the book at all, but we simply, we dissected the elements of publishing, which include all of the parts of a book, like the cover of a book, the table of contents, the index, chapters. And we thought through those as a form of study, actually. So it became a series of events for this exhibition in Korea, which included workshops, translating activities, a video. The cover of the book became a video that was shown on an LED screen in a public square. A form of mushroom growing rituals also became chapters of the book. And we therefore wanted to consider this sort of fermentation of knowledge production in an immaterial way as a form of social gathering. Let's see. And this is another project which is part of our own publishing practice that I wanted to touch upon lightly. It's called the Secondhand Mountain Fortress, or Shan, like Second Mountain series. And alongside this issue of, or this question of copying, it goes back to, I guess, the question of translation in a way, because copying, I think Derrida speaks of copying as a form of economy, actually. There are equivalences to be made from one copy to the next. And it's always a question, both with the question of the copy or the translation, if these are one-to-one relationships. I don't believe they are. And this is actually what the Ultra Translation Manifesto speaks about. And with that disjuncture or the asymptote that occurs in the space between a so-called original and its so-called copy or its so-called translation, what are those gaps that enable us to reconsider relations themselves, or relations between meaning and value, relations between production processes and our relationships to production. So this series is simply a kind of pirate book series, and anyone in China, of course, will be very familiar with this kind of possibility to photocopy books in any copy shop or via Taobao. And it's basically one of the most important resources for students to have access to knowledge. So what we did was we started to invite different practitioners who are part of the Display Distribute Network, including artists and activists, curators, writers, etc., to dedicate a book to us that they feel is important to their practice or for their considerations of how they produce. And these books are given to us either as a hard copy or simply as a PDF. And they write a dedication inside that speaks of why this book is important for them. And then we produce them as a print-on-demand series, which we also sell in the distro. And we keep them relatively, I think the entire project actually seeks to keep the costs as low as possible as a way of kind of avoiding the kind of spectacularization of independent publishing that has happened in recent years. But it's actually really, because it's really mostly about this circulation of knowledge that we hope, like a lot of them are, they might be from classical Western canon, like Jacques Rancière. We have a book from him. But we try to include, for example, translations if they're available, and put them together. So they're not necessarily already, they become not direct translation of a pirated book, but they, in a way, become edited volumes of their own. So these are some of the book fairs and kind of selling aesthetics that get involved with the practice, as well as this bookshelf backpack selling activity. And I think that's about it. I don't know how long I've spoken, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks. Yes, thank you, Elaine, for introducing us a very physical P2P to bring this very messy materiality beyond, I think, very computing, virtual technology we've been talking about. I have worked as a courier of the light logistics. It's a very interesting experience. Just maybe a quick question from the slide. Meanwhile, we do have to hurry up a bit. We are quite overrun a bit of time. So a very practical question from a user. I will read in Chinese and also in the chat box. 如何成为一位慢递员？递送员是作为志愿者加入的吗？会有报酬或者是雇佣关系吗？还是完全自愿免费去递送的？ I think Elaine mentioned, but I think maybe the question is more talking about what are this social relationship among the couriers or between the buyers and delivers? What kind of community is this?
So yes, it's a completely volunteer-run service, but the initial
I think Elaine's internet freezed. Oh, Okay, let's wait a bit. Maybe, I think you're back. Yes.
Did I just get cut out? Oh, that was.
Yeah, I think you're freezed. Please continue.
Okay, so yeah, the initial call for this is actually for this to be based on existing travel. So it's not that we're asking people to carry stuff for us as a job or anything. It's that they're already traveling from point A to point B, and therefore, if they are willing and have a little bit of extra carrying capacity, that they can carry this for free. We do offer discount, like if a courier has already run for us, then we will give them a discount on publications that they want to purchase. But it's really not about this sort of reward relationship in that sort of sense in a kind of traditional commercial exchange. I mean, I think that our emphasis on the relationships and the possibility of kind of serendipity in a random conversation that you might have with somebody along the way, those things we hope by virtue of being documented, establish a kind of value and possible longer term relationships that is what the project as a whole seeks. So that it's happened on so many cases that the friendships have been made because of this project. And I mean, it sounds a little bit cheesy to talk about making friends via this artwork. But we can maybe borrow, from the Documenta sort of slogan of like, make friends, not art. Friendship is maybe a little overwrought of a term, but I think to nurture the kind of ecologies where we can support one another as independent practitioners is extremely important, I think. So.
Thank you. There are more questions, but I will come back to them later. So let's welcome our fourth speaker, Yang Jing. Yang Jing is a game producer, curator, and researcher based in Hong Kong. Her work covers many aspects of game production and gaming culture. Her recent work, Forgetter, a narrative game, has won multiple awards worldwide. She is now working on multiple game production projects, ranging from literature games to VR platformer games and motion capture game theater. Besides game production, Yang is also known for her long-time dedication to game critique and curation works. Welcome, Yang Jing.
Hi everyone. Let me share my screen first. Can you see the window?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, hi everyone. These are a few notes I took listening to the previous speakers. I think I resonate a lot with everyone, and I'm actually changing and updating my PowerPoint while you're speaking. I want to cover all the points.
Do you want to go full screen? Sorry, do you want to?
I usually do this. Is it okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And also, what is P2P? Hope I will understand better as I walk through this PowerPoint. So mine is probably the least theoretical presentation of tonight. It's more like a field report of two annual projects I have finished so far. One is called Game Kitchen. The other is called Game at Last. There's a reason I don't go to slideshow. So this is a field report of the two projects. First, maybe I'll give you a very brief introduction of what are these weird things. So Game Kitchen is a bi-weekly gathering of everything related to game really. And we meet every other Thursday in an indie art space called Current Plans. I guess a lot of you who are in Hong Kong or have been here and into art must know the place. It's somewhere in between Prince Edward MTR station and Shensuibo. You can walk there too. And it's really something very DIY and small. We started with inviting first artists and designers to present online with a lot of Zoom attenders as tonight, because we started the beginning of this year when Hong Kong was facing the fifth wave of COVID, and there's a very stupid and strict control of social distancing. So we started with something like this. And gradually, as Hong Kong opens up, we can gather. And that's the best part. We slowly invited game designers, local game designers, or game masters, if you like to play D&D, to the site. And the topics are changing and inconsistent all the time, depending on who's in town and who's available at that day. So like these ones are really a workshop telling you how to make AR objects and upload it into a lot of so-called metaverse platforms. And people had fun making it. And this is more of a board game designer night for Hong Kong board game designers and also game masters, because we have a lot of board game stores here to share their experience of running sessions or design their own games. Or we also have the opportunity to invite local game designers. There's not a lot, but there are a lot of passionate amateurish or part-time game designers who are eager to meet each other and have a space to share their work, especially this year. So this is what Game Kitchen looks like. And this really nice little space is one room in current plans. The current plan itself is larger, and it usually has a indie art exhibition going on. So when people come, they can also spend some time outside visiting the exhibition. And we open officially from 8 to 10, 11. But sometimes, or most of the times, we open the door around 4 to 6. People are familiar with us now, so they can come early if they have time. And we have some basic game consoles, and people donate a lot of game books and board games, so they can hang out here. And then fast forward to October, it's something more serious and industrial. It's a week-long. Some people call it a game forum. Some people think it's a festival, but this is it. Like we have different formats putting together. The first 4 days was still in the game kitchen. I mean, the current plans with people going online and offline again. Attending very interesting and professional talks in between, I think, genius game designers from Hong Kong, or because it's the whole project is funded by the Goethe Institute. So it's something about Germany, something about East Asia, which is China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, maybe North Korea too. And so you can see a lot of German games and games from Hong Kong and other regions presented here, and their designers, if they can't get to Hong Kong, we have the money. They were there. If not, they were online. And then on the weekend, we moved to M+. There was a museum game night where 3 game design teams showcased their game design, while the museum audience was invited on stage. Not all of them could be invited because of the time restraint. So some of them, while the gamers are playing it, the designers are explaining the design philosophy behind it. So this is a very quick introduction to the title. What is Game Kitchen and what is Game Atlas? So Game Kitchen is this weekly thing, and Game Atlas is only once in a year, and hopefully next year too. And so, but people who know me said, because Linda was talking about ethnography or anthropology of the self, so I added this part. So people who know me said this is Allison and her friends. Allison is my English name. Chinese name is Yang Jing. So all of the contents and people are actually delivered by people who are really my friends. But as I think more about it, I add one more, and Allison and her friends and their friends. So this is a methodology presentation, I guess, to use my own very fresh experience to talk about how, for me, to run this community-based thing for a year and finally survived in some way. Speaking of Allison, so I'm a game addict or game player. This is one of the last game I played. I just screen capped from my Steam. I spend way too much time here. So to start with, I think everyone is a player. You just don't play, and I do play. And a lot of my friends, whatever they do in real life, they're players too. That's like the basic, most common identity we all share in the events I just mentioned. On top of that, I'm a journalist, a writer, and for years I've been writing things about video games or game culture, game art. When you write as a journalist, you get to know more people in the industry or around the industry. You also meet other writers who are interested to write with you. So this is another part where Allison's friends come from. And then as a lot of people here tonight, I'm also affiliated with SEM, City University of Hong Kong. Currently, I'm trying to finish my PhD. I am finishing my PhD in this department, and I write about games or game arts or game and museums or game art and museums. And there are networks of people who are practitioners in doing game art or actually making games or indie games. And some of them are researchers, and there are annual meetings or gatherings or just friendly meetings in between us. And there are networks of game researchers and game curators. We hold something to make like a game curators toolkit every year and share our experiences and exchange good games, because a lot of us are located in so-called peripherals of the game world, which is not in North America. So there are gems of games, but people don't know about it. So my friends becomes the messenger, ambassador of these games, and they're usually also friends with the designers. So you can see it's like snowballing more and more. The network began. And one part of my work is to do curation works in museums or museum settings, and it's always around games. This is the last one I did. It was in Shanghai, and I tried more and more to do exhibitions, or especially game exhibitions, that people in that city, in this case in Shanghai or Hong Kong in the future, can really understand and relate to these games. Because of all kinds of reasons, most game arts or games exhibited in the museums are in English or have very little interactive design in it, or difficult to implement in museum settings or in personal computers. So it somehow removes itself a little from the audience, which make it more like a visual art or fine art experience for them just to look. But the essence of game is always in the interaction. So now I'm trying to work hard towards like making exhibitions about something people can relate to, understand with local knowledge and local networks. For instance, this one, there are 19 games, and all of them are actually, they could be played in China, which is a miracle considering the lessons and all other restrictions of Chinese game market. And a lot of them are designed by people in Shanghai or in Taiwan, but visiting Shanghai. So that way the designers can actually bring more philosophies or history of designs or their field notes into the curation. And also in public programs, the audience could also get some sense of what game designers are like, or what this game is about really from a behind the scene point of view. And then the last part of my job, the really lucky one, is to make games. So when you do make a game, you can enter to game fairs or game festivals, and people treat you with some respect because you're one of them now. And so I quickly draw a stupid mind map. It's all these things started with me, but it looks like me-centric. It doesn't have to be, because this person can be another Allison or Ellen. And so this map would grow and grow and grow. This year I was in Germany and I got to catch the Documenta 14. Is it 14 or 15? Sorry, maybe it's 15. And I saw a similar pattern. We were joking, like maybe they should call the Malaysian Friend Network, and it still works. I think it doesn't cut off any legitimacy of this document, I only make it more realistic because that's how a lot of us in the field are working like. And I was thinking about what is P2P playful community. I actually made this title because of this forum, but it makes a lot of sense now. The P2P has a lot of meanings. Maybe I should this first, especially in the setting of I don't know, mainland China. It can be a financial scam, but it can also be depends on who you are. It's English, so you can be free. It can be play to play, player to player, person to person, PS to PS, pirate players to pirate designers, things like that. So I was thinking there's something special about game. It's very easy to form a game community, and online and offline are not divided at all. We're always on both. And also the best thing is the gaming community is cut across demographics. You can be a public intellectual who really likes to play Monkey Island. Someone I actually know, but another Monkey Island player might be a high school dropout, and you still have something common to start a conversation with, or you can play together. And within this temporal spatial limit, you have a lot to share and you can communicate. And also when we do the workshops in game kitchens, I had the habit to start at the beginning. I wanted to be very academic or serious, and I frame the titles to be like that. But it doesn't work for me, at least in Game Kitchen, because it's intimidating for a lot of people who are attending. They want to learn, but really is learn from each other, or at least spend time with each other. But when we start with game, it always, no matter how hard I try to make it serious, it always would shift itself to something more fun, sometimes stupid, but it can also be emotional or meaningful. So it actually cut open a really large potential area for people to be people together, P2P. And within these contexts, there's less talk and watch. There's still talk and watch, but you can also do an experience, especially in workshops or game sharing nights. It even doesn't have to be game. Sometimes like game is just a starting point, because a lot of games are simulating lives, especially now. When it's so difficult to talk about real things, because of all the dangers, people can start to talk about virtual things which simulate the real things, and it helps. Or they always say game is for escape, but when you escape, you can find people who are also trying to escape, and you can build a temporary refugee together. Okay, and then we're also talking about centralized and decentralized. I personally don't think centralized for small community is a problem. We're not enough in number or in quantity or in quality. So if it's a temporal small, like a year, or in a city, there's a centralized community of us. It actually is very nice. I have some examples I'll quickly walk you through. These are the people I invited to my events, either in Game Kitchen or in Game Atlas or in other settings. You can see why like playful community can be easy and the community can be formed. This is Professor or Dr. Patrick Lemieux. This is one of his artwork or game work. It's called Octopad. It basically deconstructs the classical Nintendo console to 8 consoles. So when you 8 controllers. So when you want to control one Super Mario, now you need 8 people to do it. And this is one of the, I think, workshop or after party of exhibition opening I held. Oh yeah, it was in Shenzhen. And these are people from Germany and those are from Shenzhen, and they started to play together, and you have to communicate because it's a cooperation game suddenly. And then people are talking about playing together and working together and what is it with the culture of sharing. And there you go. You don't have to give a talk. They would talk by themselves. And another one is this year in Cologne, helping a Shanghai company to showcase their game in Game Fair because they couldn't go at that time. Shanghai was really bad still now. And so these are the people offline, and they would immediately change to Discord because they want to share things, which is a digital version of things. Comparing to other communities, maybe not Web3, but other communities, game community has less difficulties to connect people on or offline. And it can also be completely bizarre. Like this is one of the game we invited to Game at Last. It's a game built by a Stuttgart designer who refused to come to Hong Kong because he wants to protect the environment and he likes solitude. So he built a game called The Longing, where you have to play 400 days by yourself and everything goes really slow and real time in the game. This is a lonely game, but because it's released during COVID, so it attracted a lot of lonely souls everywhere. And people still started to talk on Discord or Twitter. And then another community is formed. The last one is a workshop I held with two artists. One is a choreographer, the other is a director and a musician. There's not even a game. The people are the game. And we started to build a game together on a paper. And then a lot of life experience run out and it's only 1 hour. So really we can only have a paper-based prototype, but people are trying to make it further and then they have to work with each other. So, but then we're talking about community. These are more temporal communities. Now we're building something in Hong Kong, which is physical, which has to have people, maybe not a lot, but gradually there's a lot. So there are a few tips I gained this year. I want to show you this because this is the last one we had. The last one too. And you can see there's like 20 to 30 people and it's not a lot, but when it's peak, there can be 50 or 60 and the space is so small, we couldn't hold everyone. I want to show this because in the beginning, there's no one, especially because it's on Zoom, but also the time was not convenient for everyone. And also people don't know about us. So we really tried a lot of things to make it become like this. And when we did the session in M+, there's many people. So sometimes I think maybe there would be more if we have a larger space. And how to do that? First, I think we need to have partners because if you're like me, you're one person or 1.5 person band, and you have to rely on resourceful. You don't have to be so resourceful, but responsible and professional and really caring organizations to help you. And for us, we are lucky we have like good institute who somehow dedicated themselves to make game-related events. And they have the experience of running a lot of screen-based exhibitions or workshops or gatherings. So it provided a lot of technical and professional help, like running organization 101 for a year and taught me well. And then we have the current plans, which is tiny, but really nice. It already is a known space and the curator, she's a mediator. She connected a lot of game people with art people. And another breakdown of these seemingly isolated demographics. And then we, because I'm affiliated to CTU also helped mostly in talents, like in CTU, the teachers and students were doing game-related projects, like Professor UC, and he came to share his work in a non-academic setting. But a lot of designers really benefited a lot because his research is about game design. And finally, this is M+. I think they're just really nice located and already have a ready audience. One more thing about M+ is that when you're working with museum and art spaces, people have the concern or reservation of making game-related events. They always say people who like art don't play game. In my experience, it's always wrong. A lot of artists not only make games, but they're game addicts too. And you don't have to be an expert to play game. You just need to be a human and you already know how to play a game. And then I figure nobody has mentioned this. We used a lot of commercial online tools because it's the most efficient one. This year is the first time I tried using advertisement on Instagram and Facebook I used to despise it. I think it's not organic, but it seems to be working really well, because if I always stay with Allison and friends, it will be always Allison and friends. And as outgoing as I am, I have a limit. But when people came and asked them, how did you find here? They're through social media, and social media could really attract. It's a bit scary, like the very type of player related to the very type of game we were presenting. It's somehow more, maybe it's wrong, but in experience, more democratic in a way. We're finally out of the circle of artists and intellectuals and scholars, and reach to someone who are like college dropouts or part-time laborers, but we're interested in these freely organized events. And we use like Instagram or Google Form and try to keep in touch with people in the most simple, technically simple way. And the last one is, what do I have? And there's already always communities who are doing the same thing with you. And it's wrong to brag that you are doing the thing. You're the first to do it. It's really helpful to work together, because most of the small organizations have the same problem. They don't have enough resources or time to work on it. So we help each other. Like this one is a network of professional game developers in Hong Kong, and they don't have the space, but we do. And they have a lot of experienced game professionals, not only in developing, but also in commercialization or in gamifying education staff or Web3 technologies, and they can come and talk. And this one is called Amateurish Game Designers in Hong Kong. They always meet online. They're shy, but once they meet each other in our space, and they're also connected to other kind of game designers or non-game designers, those sparkles were really amazing. And this plus this generated, it should be, map is how networked people are. And one last page is, because I was traveling in Taiwan last weekend, so the Goethe Institute and my friends on Facebook also invited me to bring some contents into locations in Taiwan. It's done in a week. And I think people just need a reason to hang out, and we created the excuse. And now both spaces, the bookstore and the art space owned by Goethe, are thinking about holding more events like that locally. I think that's the end of my presentation, and I may leave early, so I leave my contacts here if you need. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. I really like what you said, that game also make people to be people, because that's actually not always the situation, especially in the highly technical mediated environment. And I'm also really amazed how you incorporate so many different actors, from international institutions to local independent actors, and also to institutional actors, to form this playful game community and friendship. I'm gonna actually ask a question, I think follow up of what you said, how game bring people together. As I know you're very active in different Chinese speaking contexts, including Hong Kong, in mainland China, also in Taiwan. What's your experience or scenarios that you think game community can facilitate a dialogue that over the existing frictions or misunderstandings, as I think it's much kind of what we need in current conditions?
It's kind of interesting, because I was in Nowhere, Feidi, in Taiwan. It's a bookstore, but the owner is from mainland China, and she moved to Hong Kong, become the founder of Initium, and then she moved to Taiwan, become the founder of the bookstore and also a Web3 network called Matters. So already her bookstore would welcome people from, I would say, different demographics, like Hong Kong refugees in Taiwan. Not refugees, sorry. Some of them are scholars and artists, but also like Taiwanese writers, art lovers. So that night, because it was last Saturday, which was the electoral, what's it called, Taipei mayor election. So people were pretty sad, and they came after they know the result, and we started by talking about games, and but gradually, again, the topic is shifted to how to simulate a more open space in the game, or how our systems built in the game. And I was there with 3 Taiwanese game designers because of our own background, career-wise or personal-wise. We can, I think our approach are pretty different. But then it's political but apolitical at the same time, and you're having fun. There's a quote that the biggest magic or trick video game pull is that to make people think it's just a video game. So you have this relaxed atmosphere, and you talk about things going on, like the party politics in Taiwan, what's happening in Xinjiang, because I'm from there, and what's happening in Hong Kong. And it is quite nice. But given what's going on right now, like how to use game as a space, I'm sure there are people, players in China using some MMORPG or open world games, building something to say something there. And I know people are posting game posters, which has something to do with fighting the power or whatever, to express what they want to say. So I'm pretty pessimistic on everything today. I hope there's hope in gaming or other things.
Yes, thank you. I think definitely, I remember how this magical moment, we witnessing people playing in this M+ big staircase. There is kind of a simultaneous connection, I feel. Yeah.
Sorry, I can bring some positive power. I finally remembered. It is during the game week, because we finally secured some grant to invite people from China and Taiwan and Germany to come. And plus we have Hong Kong designer and artist. And the theme of the games are, I call it socially realistic games. And so these are the games try to connect with the real world, simulating it or try to portray something, and allow others to experience it without knowing the cultural background to start with. But you can immerse yourself in it and experience the difficulties or the histories or whatever enveloped in this game. So there are more and more game designers or artists doing that. Maybe the hope is there. Like if you can't do anything, you can preserve it and resonate with other people through gaming.
Definitely. So we don't have a question yet from Slido. So, but because Alison may have to leave earlier, if there are questions, I will direct it to you, and we will think about maybe how to answer them. So thanks a lot, Alison. So let's move to our final speaker, Queenie. Sorry, we keep Queenie waiting a bit. So let me introduce her. Queenie Lee, her collating lens-based media installation, performance, and writing. Queenie's studio practice examines the ambivalence of institutional, techno-political, and cultural power through interdisciplinary exploration. Queenie holds a BFA from Oxford University and a Master of Science in Art, Culture, and Technology from MIT. She is currently teaching at the Master of Arts in Creative Communication program at HKU. So welcome, Queenie.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Looks good?
Yes, it's good.
Great. So thank you, Jingwu, for the introductions. Especially, I want to thank Linda for inviting me to the group. Absolutely enjoy all the inspiring sharing from other speakers. I'm extremely humbling to be here, and please forgive me because I'm the last one to speak. So I'm going to take the advantage of responding to this topic in the most discursive and distance position. But basically today I'm going to focusing on what Jingwu called provocation in the panel description. So I want to think about intersectional as well as interspecies approach in expanding the idea of peers, thinking through feminist ideas such as deconstructing, Eurocentric model of men, anti-humanism, but also anti-anthropocentrism. In a sense, I'm naturally prone to an expanded notion of peer as humans, but also more than humans. So if P2P is regarded as a grassroots initiative among a multitude of definitions, I do hope to take a step tonight and return to the glass and the roots per se. So I do believe that while as the conference theme denoted how Web3 development has underpartnerized a lot of legacy of P2P, a lot of guests today have already spoken this kind of notion of sharing, idea of open access, democratic participation, socially engaged practice, and so on. An expanded concept of P2P with further possibilities of communities, including humans, but also beyond humans, would help to put the ecological agenda back to the hype of Web3. And this is also what I'm going to touch on a little bit further later. This issue of environmental impact of many new network emergence. I'm going to share 3 projects today. I hope to share with you how some of my curiosity and exploration on network technology has been shaped by this passion for ecological report. So it is perhaps this idea of being undesired, undesired probably by people with power, existing at the margin, that urban weeds attract me for many years. So now this photo shown was taken at what's today the West Kowloon Cultural District in Hong Kong during 2017. The site has been in construction for over a decade. Even today, it's a very much a work in progress site. Of course, now there is a bit of more opening of different facilities. Weeds is a man-made category created to differentiate plants that unfit human expectations. They are the unwanted batch within a particular context. From weeds to weeding, so the term weeds to weeding turned the word from its noun to its third form actually denote the eradication of its own. So people will say that they do weeding is like removal of weeds. And to me, this is always another layers of violence that our language inflict upon these wild greens after we name them. But I choose to see their vitality and performativity. Weeds are not choreographers by any central hands. There are no driving plant species. Weeds are an umbrella term, foregrounding a sense of enormity. Perhaps their triviality is their reason for survival. Somehow we just take them for granted. We take them in the background. It is this power of decentralizing oneself, displacing one ego, that you kind of blend in and go under the radar. So a bit of rethinking subjectivities. For the past 5-6 years, I was traveling a bit. I study abroad. I drift away from Hong Kong and until this summer. So my observation of urban weeds also went a bit nomadic. Do you think the experience of weeds would differ when we move beyond geographies? Is it a phenomenon with plentitude of forms, or many phenomena differentiated by their geopolitical origins? It's a question, sometimes we receive a lot of questions from the audience. It's a question from me to you, perhaps. I have often taken an ethnographic research of weeds as a way of understanding the urban landscape of a foreign land. Increasingly, I do see such a microscopic observation does reflect a macroscopic context. For instance, this picture was taken in Athens in 2017 when the country is experiencing an economic downturn, so it's easy to see weeds overriding obsolete construction sites. Or weeds that's are discolored, covered with dust, struggling in polluted area. Or weeds that's borrowed across unique objects. So here we see motorbikes, a few motorbikes signifying our times. Or weeds that disguise surveillance. Or weeds that witness the ebb and flow of history. So this microscopic observation of the relationship between we's and urban typology remind me of the three ecologies put forward by Phyllis Guattari. So he mentioned the physique, the social relations, the environment are not three distinctive set of questions. It's always a continuous interplay that reflect a more holistic problem-solving approach towards these equilibriums of our times, especially perhaps in our context against technocratic development. These vibrant infinite patterns of urban we's visualize an ecological praxis whose deterritorializing power aids the discovery and rediscovery of new configurations. The conflict and yet interaction between nature and culture crystallize in the rupture of we's binding, blinding, disguising, decorating urban infrastructures. On the other hand, this encounter between me and we's are chance operations. So my way of connecting them straight away from any scientific cartographic systems. A lot of people ask me, do I archive my photographs in any systematic manner? So the answer is no. It is my intention to avoid any perhaps academic form of classification or just the classic botanical hierarchies. I think the question is that the growing scale of Web3 has demonstrated itself as a replica from conventional capitalist values. I think Winnie has touched on a little bit on this when talking about NFT, but also just from personal observations and conservation with peers. It's always there's a question that despite this impressive amount of investment poured into the art tech development or NFT speculations, is there any comparative emphasis on content itself or the role of culture as a whole in this kind of art tech wave? So I feel that what's precious about P2P is this ability to suggest different values other than repeating the same formula of efficiency, effectiveness, accuracy, and so on and so forth. It is not to create a P2P in order to prove that we can do things better than other networks. So it's to ask the question, what does it mean by better? And I think Yiling's logistic network respond extremely well on this because, this idea of lacking technical capacity, but then unleashing a lot of possibilities, stories that would not be able to cover if we only rely on dominant mainstream structures. So it is to see P2P as a prototype to suggest alternative methodologies. In my case, in these projects of we's, I kind of take inspiration from James Agee in Let Us Now Praise the Famous Man, a photo essay volume documenting agriculture workers during the American Great Depressions, in which he wrote, in the immediate world, everything is to be discerned for him who can discern it, centrally and simply without either dissection into science or digestions into art, but with the hold of consciousness seeking to perceive it at its stems. For me, in we's, I observe that it seems to be a bottom-up, discursive, perhaps from central point of view, it looked like accidental kind of effort from we's to bypass the order of delineated sovereignty infrastructures to inhabit the periphery of urban structures. The vibrancy of we's drift between both proactivity and reactivity. And this is the beauty of it in the sense it's very hard to categorize and pin down. It's very slippery. So this contemplation on characteristic of we's have stayed with me and sometimes manifest in other work. Between 2019 and 2021, I partnered with Joe Austin Cunningham, an architect and researcher, and work on this project called No Humans in the City But We's. I've got a bit of obsession with this we's thing. In this project, we explore the mushrooming phenomena of data centers within the intense urban fabrics of Hong Kong. So perhaps not many people know it. Even in a place with such severe land shortage, Hong Kong hosts more than 50 data centers. In other words, against the seemingly virtual and intangible network that are powered by internet, we are looking at how data is materialized within urban density. So in Hong Kong, the data center will not manifest in any typical form that you will see perhaps in America or in the West. Because of land shortage, our data center actually a lot of time inhabit in obsolete industrial buildings, which also kind of reviewing perhaps the transformation of economy. Anyway, now I'm hoping to share a short video clip from this project. Okay, I'll come back to my slides. All right, give a second. Right. So I hope the video is not too bumpy through soon. So as the name of the project denotes, we are thinking that perhaps today we look at we's at city nomad, inhabiting gaps and cracks at the margin. But in a possible future, when our lifestyle continues to migrate onto an online realm, the physical landscape will likely be catered more for these network infrastructure or architecture to support our online activities, and we may become the we's in the city plans. For instance, during the pandemic or during lockdown, we largely work from home and meet and socialize in the so-called metaverse, and the need for physical space, of course, will be radically transformed. On the other hand, we are also aware of the immense environmental impact that are left by these power-hungry data centers, to an extent that our existing urbanity will be challenged to accommodate these 24/7 operating boiling servers. So that's why in the video we see that all these shots are taken in Hong Kong. We moved from the Jiangpan Data Center Village, which is built on reclaimed lands, into many industrial buildings in Hong Kong that is undergoing retrofit to be able to fit the agenda and the requirement of becoming a data center. So I guess this project hopes to be mindful of these ecological impact brought by the online network, thinking about also against this kind of immense typological change, how would us redeem our presence and perhaps can learn from the flexibility and agility of we's to build new network and solidarity in the future. So this is we have this archive site, project site, nohumans.city, with all our writings, photographs, diagrams, films, for those who are interested in understanding further. So the last project that I hope to share today is also inspired by ecological forms, in this case, rhizomes, and also this idea of hybrid. Chimera, the name of the project, is an experimental reading group that toys with many values that we have discussed, or I have discussed, the enormity of these, but also alternative form of conversing on paper, like colors, forms, freehand sketchings, making notes, so on and so forth. In the project current iterations, I collaborated with Ki Kan, a computer scientist and an architect, in shaping the virtual platform we built and continue to roll out new reading rounds. The project started in the summer of 2021 with the funding from MIT Transmedia Storytelling Initiative. Till today, we have run 3 reading groups, each lasting around 2 months, with around 20 participants in total. So a bit of the intentions, me and my collaborators, a group of bookworms. So kind of started just hope to toy with the form of reading. Perhaps also to resonate with Michel de Sautour, the practice of everyday life, in a way how we can rethink our daily rituals and operations and transform it into a proactive inquisition, which I think a lot of speakers today also touch on. So what does it actually, how does Chimera works? Each participant, we usually have around 6 to 8. Each participant will contribute a piece of reading of their choice to the pool. We will leave the reading group unthemed for now. So there is also this interest of letting loose of where the discussion will develop. So after we gather all this reading from the participant, we will circulate the readings among them. Each will read and annotate the reading enormously within 1 or 2 weeks. So you can see that they may, make their own kind of synonym when they comment on the readings. And as you can imagine, with the weeks evolve, the reading will gradually gather more and more thoughts and traits from different readers. This emphasis on anonymity encourage a free exchange of thoughts without any baggage of one's own background or origin, as well as the risk of forming echo chamber. The design of the reading group is to think about how reading isn't necessarily an act of solitude, but perhaps papers could also become a social place. So this kind of resonating perhaps with Winnie's workshop on the open source book edit and translation, but also I was deeply touched by a quote that I saw from Yiling's slides on reading as a gathering of multitudes. So apart from conventional reading groups, usually everyone will read the same piece of reading and come together to discuss. As an alternative, we are thinking how to create a low stress environment. So people kind of constantly reading and conversing and exchanging their ideas together with all these kind of different form of exchange of thoughts. For our pilot run, so we piloted in 2021 summer, the group only operated with us as the facilitator, sending and collecting readings and annotation through email. So it's a hugely time-consuming process. So in early 2022, this year, I was glad that he, as well as Charles Wu, another computational designer that I knew from MIT, joined the team and helped construct this, our very own multi-user online platform at Chimera.place to facilitate the exchange process. This is also, the code are also open source as well. This is the homepage of the site, this top image, which is active today. Once the participant log in, they will see the page of the timeline where the readings will appear week by week. They could log in anytime within the week to download the latest reading and then upload their annotation afterwards through the website. So this mode of circulation also foregrounds a sense of collective responsibility because we have to gather all the readings for that cycle in order to redistribute it. So if one fails to upload the materials in time, the entire process will not be able to continue. While the process is enormously conducted, we set up different social prompts to ask participants to present every week alongside their annotations. So they will upload both their annotations, but also respond to the social prompts. For instance, here we are asking participants to share an image of their reading environments. So this is to build a sense of community, even without revealing each other's identity. Sometimes we ask for, your favorite quote of your reading that week, or we will ask for their to screenshot existing annotation on their reading that they find most intriguing, or even to make a recording of their reading environment and upload a sound file. So we hope to also further playing around with senses and maintain this interactivity of the reading group. Upon the completion of all reading circulations, participants would have collectively built a bibliography. So it's almost a kind of a souvenirs of the whole exercise that stem from the circulated material. So in the center are all, so for example here, all the black readings are the readings that are circulated, but then we also ask participants to share further readings that they find relevant to that specific group and themes that explored with from all the weeks. So at the end, people will have this kind of collective bibliography, and currently we're working to publish it in our platform as and other open source knowledge generated by the participants. This is my last slide. So all of us will meet. So it's not that, although the whole process is enormous, at the end of the process, we will all meet and kind of just introduce ourselves to each other and reflect on the whole process, and to kind of also we will ask for the advice or ideas on how we can develop our next process. The past 3 rounds were mainly organized with community in Boston, where I was based in the last 2 years. But currently we are looking at organizing group with different language. So a reading group that perhaps in Chinese or in Korean. We are also hoping to organize more localized group. So I absolutely hope that at a chance I could organize one in Hong Kong or perhaps this side of the world, and continue to test this idea of reading as a social place, but also as a generative network. That's it. I hope I have not spent too much time.
Thank you, Queenie. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. Especially, I think you sort of bridge very important threads that has been going through different speakers, and especially foregrounding these materialities of the computational infrastructure, which is actually very grounded in our climate, in our limited resources. And I'm just going to also ask a question. What my advantage is the host. I'm really curious about the Chimera project you presented at the end, because it just seems to be a little bit black boxed, but it's like this interesting mixture of hiding but also revealing. But what are the criteria of selecting participants, and also this reading source? Are there kind of a tendency or protocols that as organizer you kind of sort of more provoke that you should choose more maybe unconventional readings in terms of languages or their schools of thoughts? What are more maybe detailed mechanisms, how you organize this?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the questions. No, we don't have any preference on the type of readings. That's why we could have really the list of reading that circulated could range from mass culture to very specific discipline specific readings. And this is kind of the fun, as at least as according to what participants have shared so far, is that they really have no idea which would be the next reading. And somehow it forced them to walk out from their comfort zone in reading things that they will never want to read or will select to read. We have always discussed whether we should theme it or at least give some prompts. I'm sure this is some of the options that we could explore in the future. There's no selection process whatsoever, because we just started. That is mainly word of mouth, or we actually just send, mass email, and whoever respond. When there are more people responding, we break it into 2 groups or more groups. So because usually one reading will stay with each other for 1 to 2 weeks. So we can't have 2. If we have 6 participants, there will be 6 reading. Then that means there will be at least 6 to 12 weeks. So the group size can't be too big. Our team at some point have 4 people, so like the possibility of 4 hosts or 4 facilitators to help just managing, kind of coordinating the team. So, but I must say that currently it's still very, very much experimental and test in a pilot and testing period. So perhaps you can join our next round. Let us know how it goes.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to read a critical question, but take it as more constructive, I think, comment. So this anonymous user, she's interested in what you said, but she's wondering from the video clip you show, she felt there's a strong sense of aesthetic choice and very emphasis on the form. But what is connection between the form and the message? She felt a little bit semi-secluded and very indulged in a bourgeois sense of melody, sense of nostalgia. Bourgeois sense of nostalgia of the city landscape. What's the connection between a real action? It's a bit. I'm sure. Did you get the question? You're muted.
Okay,
just I think a critique of the video clip you showed.
Yeah. No, I like this sharing. I think I can't avoid bringing in my own subjectivities. There is something that I feel very strongly about this phenomenon, like how data centers in Hong Kong actually inhabiting in buildings that used to inhabit by humans, and also in the sense that a lot of citizens are very distant to architectures or landscape that they walk past. You thought this is just a normal industrial building. You never know that inside is actually full of servers. It's a non-human space. only if you pay attention and hear that 24/7 humming sound. So I think there are this kind of strong sense of alienations, absolutely resonating, perhaps a little bit with what Alison said as hopelessness. I do can't avoid and perhaps also trying to not to bring in something that could be feel rather than to be explained. So this, like observing this phenomena, doing our own research, kind of visualizing it through our diagrams, but at the same time, also through the camera, through the lens to capture some sort of sentiment that I see this cities is going through beyond this phenomena. So perhaps this is where the aesthetics or the forms comes in. But I would say that this project is quite distantly commenting on the conference theme, which is this idea of decentralized platform or P2P. So in the way that when I produce it, it's not it's not similar to how other for example, open source or code generated work will be made. I'm curious to hear what Linda may say about the theme, because I absolutely feel very nervous to showing a bit of video clip in front of her.
I don't have much to say about it. I think I would not take your video as something that is that would take the place of your discourse. Video is video. I think when you just described the video, I got the sense of the video giving us a very unique sense of space that I probably would not have. Maybe that is why your specific kind of art form needs to be in place. You know, they do things that another art form does not do. So, but that cannot be taken as the illustration of your talk or the replacement of what you care about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I also think maybe the audiences are looking for Hong Kong panelists to give a very strong, true action-based solutions, but which I'm sure we really cannot, as everyone maybe in this days is really difficult struggle to provide. But
I do want to make an observation after hearing all the panelists. I'm very happy to have been here. Something very concrete and workable I hear from all of these discussions. I do feel there is a distance because of my generation, or maybe because of my age, and maybe because of my concern and my research work, that I felt something I want to hear more has not been broadly discussed. And this is not an accusation. Okay, this is just to make my observation that I feel there are 4 speakers here who are very absorbed in making life better by doing whatever they can. And I felt my position seems to be very distant. I felt I have this sense of urgency that if I don't do something right now, it will be too late. And that specifically speaks to, I cannot tell you the details of the works and the projects I'm working on, but I feel a strong sense of urgency, how to live away from a central commander in a kind of network environment. So when I showed those 2 pictures about a server that seems to be like everyone has to go through that in order to get response or to transmit knowledge, I am with projects that are very urgently in need of sheltering, hiding, running away from mass public access. And part of that has to do with my position as a historian, maybe. Yeah, things need to be preserved. So in that sense, but this is helping me to work out some more immediate actions before I can ask those big questions once again. Maybe Winnie, you can tell me something.
Really, go ahead. Do you want to?
Not in particular, but I think there are also other projects that might be not in a good context to, I mean, like you need to do some kind of selections, right? Like what would be best to talk about in a particular context as well, right? So there are also other projects, maybe cooking or maybe more urgent or maybe more political, in a way that also unfold maybe in another context.
No, I'm really working on an archive, something to preserve videos made in Hong Kong over the past 40 years. And it is an urgent project. The urgency is also how to make sure it could be accessed freely without intervention. I can't say more. So it is urgent for me. And also because I'm doing so much work in making people make videos, not for the sake of aesthetic excellence, although that has to be somewhere part of it, but it's more about opening up the use of videography to people who don't even need to be an artist. And the purpose of doing that is because we need to open up as many venues as possible to speak and to say what we think and to articulate how we feel. I mean, emotions for me is very, very important. So in that context, just to share my sense of urgency and where I'm speaking from.
There's a very relevant question in the chat. I may invite all of you to respond. So it's from Fei Xuan Xu. Thank you for all of your inspiring talks. Would any of you like to comment a bit more on the feminist queer facet of your whole art practice or specific projects, if any, please? Or feminism is not necessarily a prominent label in appreciating your works in regard to today's P2P theme? Thanks. Maybe I want to invite Alison to respond first. If Alison, you're short in time, do you want to respond? And if you still have some time.
I'm still here. It's because my internet keeps crashing, so I'll shut down my video. Because I work in video game area, it's a very male-dominant field. Yeah, and both in terms of content and in terms of practitioners. That's maybe there's some positive one as a writer. I feel and I can always criticize the toxic culture inside video game and video game culture. But as an event or organizer or community organizer now, with limited resources, we can make some. I would like to think it adds small changes. For instance, always make the choice if you have a female designer, invite her first. There aren't a lot, but they're always very nice. They want to share not only the technical or creative knowledge, but also personal struggles, like how to survive in this area, and encouraging very few female participants. We do have a lot, and always the girl would start their talk by, "I'm really stupid. I don't play video game well," and correct them. And then they started to correct themselves. So it's very little things, and this is for me personally, because people know about this project now. They would find me to get some quote. Because it is a journalism thing, like you need to know a gatekeeper or someone, but refer the journalist to other people. Because then they say more faces, and that's really important. And I also make games about women. Because earlier this year, I wrote an article and I was bombed with curses. It's called Too Many Bimbos to Fill Real Woman. That's a rough translation. And it really enraged so many male players or my readers. But after writing that, I found other girls talking to me said writing is a way, but making some alternative contents is another way. If they don't make it, we have to make it by ourselves. And now that we have a community, which is not like a gender war community, there are a lot of people who understand there should be more female realistic contents, so to speak, man or woman, and they would want to do it together. So I think that's my response to this. Thanks.
Feel free, other speakers, to just jump in.
I actually expected this question to be raised at one point. I don't know, because every time this question is raised, I want to ask the person who asked the question, what do you mean by feminist? Before we can say that we are feminists or this way or that way, or we are not. But for me, cutting down the long history of feminism into one sentence, I think what is very important at this point is anti-essentialism, anti-binary, respect of differences. And so with these 3 points, and I think what something that Queenie said earlier is about anti-species hierarchy, right? We are talking about a lot of anti-hierarchical structures. And if that is the case, it is what I stand on, understanding that I must not restrict myself to be either an artist or a technologist, either someone in the humanities or someone who is interested in science, either someone who plays or someone who reads seriously, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it is really because I started to step out of these hierarchies and these binary oppositional pairs that I experienced the freedom of being able to swim more freely. And I can say that it is not always easy. So I think it's almost impossible to say that which work or which part of my work it has a feminist or queer facade. I think, yes, Winnie, please come in.
I sort of agree. I feel like for me, I guess it's instead of asking back the audience, I think for me, queer's perspective is not just only about gender and sexuality. For me, it's kind of an attitude in life. Some of the things that, Linda, you mentioned about this kind of fluidity, and especially the example that you have given, like before.
Or hybridity too.
Yeah, hybridity and fluidity as well to navigate different space like art and science in a way that we have to choose, right? When we were young in the high school, primary school, that you are either in the art track, either doing home economics, cooking or knitting or D&T, right? These kind of things. But I also feel like inherently, I think for me, how I see queer is political. It's about challenging the political structures and social structure, and also to understand the power asymmetries, dynamics, as well as inequalities. So, of course, these sounds like big terms, but also I can see these kind of lens happening in different parts of our speakers' work in a way. So another way to also think about is like how our culture is being normalized. For example, like in Yiling's project around the logistic one, like for example, like how Amazon or other Sunfeng courier company has been like capitalized, all these kind of tiny little details. But what her work is actually doing is surfacing like different narration of hidden labors or hidden stories that is so valuable, I feel like, as an artistic, but also as a way to think about the processes of circulation and open up new ways of seeing. So I guess it's for me, if I talk about queerness, I would think about how can we unsettle normalization? How can we queer about what is being normalized and how and why, what is the assumption behind, and to see it with a political lens, to see it as power asymmetrics in our society. That's my sort of response.
Elaine or Queenie, do you want to also comment?
I guess I could say, for example, in a similar way where we are focusing on circulation, and there's an extreme wealth of content that if we talk about books in this example, books are the content. And I've managed to get through the whole talk without telling you actually what any of the books are that we're selling, right? Not that that's not important at all, but I think maybe it's a generational thing, or maybe it's simply my way of working, that this label of feminist, it's not the most important. It's about the way that we work and the way that we maneuver within these systems. So in a similar way to how Winnie just described queering or queer practice, is that yes, the way of moving and the way of thinking is an upsetting of certain hegemonies, and those don't necessarily always need to be didactically put forthright. But I think if you see in terms of the way that we work, maybe they do qualify under a feminist lens. But in the same sense that if this was a panel of all men, would you ask them, are patriarchal practices important for your work? You don't ask that, and we move in this way, I think. So.
I actually feel a lot of time men, I have like male peers feel that they are not qualified to discuss anything that about feminist, which is completely terrible to me. So I think it's this making of space that, realizing that we are always part of a bigger system, think of intersectionally, breach of boundaries or just stiff categories, that I think everyone could discuss and enact some sort of feminist queer practice, absolutely.
I think feminism is one way I am so happy to have this panel, because I think when I realized, I can have this panel of whom I know are feminists, that without question, that's really a genuine joy for me. Because I think sadly it's not rare, but definitely not often that we in Chinese art context to have very clearly gender and also provocative, conscious-minded approach, especially taking to the most obvious category, maybe of addressing the power dynamics and addressing this different type of socialities beyond this blood relationship, beyond a very binary, oppositional way of thinking. So I think maybe in some contexts we do need to foreground our feminist positions, but I think in all our panelists' practices, we can see how it naturally really incorporated. It's not like really a slogan. It's how we talk, how we interact with each other, how we make friends, and how we make kinship with not just necessarily human peers, but also more than human actors. We do have now some accumulated questions from Slido. Maybe I will invite April to post in the chat box. We have some questions for different speakers. Maybe you can just freely choose one or two to answer, considering we are a little bit overdue the time. But I think first one's quite interesting. It's actually follow up a comment from the commenter who asked you the last question. So now I think I know who he is. He's actually a scholar, young scholar in Hangzhou, and he published a paper actually in the Young Scholar Forum about love letter generator. So he actually asked you that if you see in the chat box. So his name, Love Letter Generator, actually relates to 1952 Christopher Starch's algorithm of love letter. So for him, he thinks it's a heterosexual love discourse, which actually which has a melancholy queer critique on this heterosexual love discourse, because both Christopher and his collaborator Alan Turing are non-straight. So he's curious about your machine writing. What is the affection and care within your machine writing projects? Maybe Linda can answer this one first.
It's a trap question. What's wrong if a heterosexual person is speaking about love, first of all? I don't know. I think I want a response to that. But of course, just like when we talk about patriarchy versus feminism or capitalism versus other types of alternative economy, there's already a power structure there. But I think the work that I've been talking about is not to differentiate what gender orientation one is before one is allowed to speak, but because the work itself is primarily turned into a kind of open work. And open work has a lot of criteria. Some of it is about not removing oneself from certain type of more authoritarian mode of creation, such as having a strong conception before one can have execution, which to me I would call an industrial mode of creation. So there are more things that I can talk about here that came with why I started with automatism, open work, and the beauty of generative art, because of that inherent openness attached to it. So whoever speaks would speak on behalf of this person's own subject position. And since it is an open work, it is also up for response. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, because I find this question underlining some assumptions that I do not quite see or agree with. But yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. But what I'm saying here is really, why is this a problem? I don't care which other machine poet had done what, but because they have done it, and it is up to us to make our decision whether to like it or not. But I think there is a very clear reason why I was after digital poetry, although I actually write poetry. Okay, I actually write poetry. I publish it, full of emotions, whatever. But I think there is a clear reason why I am very much attracted to methods of automatism, which allows our own hidden subjectivity to find those channels to come out, to the effect of shocking ourselves that this is my voice, this is what I wrote. So I think this is basically what I can say at this point. But I'm very happy to continue this conversation after this, because I really think this is a very good question, and it invokes a lot of good questions to follow up, which I don't think I should take up here due to the time. I don't want to take away everybody's time.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can have a more maybe private discussion between Linda and the love letter generator, since we know who you are, kind of. Okay, maybe next question is for Vinny. There are several questions. Maybe if you can incorporate them in your answers. The first is, I'm going to read in Chinese. 去中心化的合作过程中出现冲突，如何解决？如何协商？ And the second one comes from Zhou Peng'an. So he is also a researcher based at the Network Society. He just bought the Economy NFT and it's quite cheap. But his Tesos is from I'm going to switch to Chinese. Tesla 却是币安上买的，这非常的不。
So I bought this book. This is when I see the economy, when I see it. So from the MoonPay buying, but the minimum buying one is 280 Hong Kong dollar. This is a very low threshold, but also this is the entry point to decentralization. So how can you address the problem of the inevitable decentralization of the blockchain buying?
in Taiwan, do they get money or similar values to translate the work? I guess maybe these three questions, so we can answer them together.
Yeah, for the Hokkaidomi project, actually, we are not just only putting the 1 million liter water on the NFT, but we are actually also doing it in like small bottle, physical object as well, because we have loads of pirated South China Sea water. So in a way, this could be also can be in a physical form of exchange of money instead. And then so for the guidelines, because that one is also something that is posted originally by a Taiwanese buyer who work on the NFT. So in a way, it's like the user guide that is kind of built upon is actually building upon from a community of people who are contributing, So in a way, if you feel or if you think that there might be another kind of wallet that might be better, I think you need to update it, as a way of like continuously changing the way of approaching or accessing NFT or wallet or these kind of things. And then the other question is about communities, whether they get money. Actually, we got money from the Taipei Digital Art Center. So will be also something to rethink about how to recruit community members and also different key translator and so on. So this will be our next year work for this project. But we are aware, like usually for a lot of community projects, I think some of the speakers also mentioned about the money issue. This is something I aware. Even for the book that we have published, Aesthetic Programming, a handbook of software studies, me and Jeff didn't get a cent at all. And even for selling the book, because it's on demand, we use the money really to go for open source publishing for the design and development for the community, really. So there's also another hidden funding issues that I think a lot of the art projects have been facing, like for me and Linda, maybe it's easier because we got sort of like a institutional backup. We can kind of able to apply funding and do it. But this is an ongoing questions. And then the last question about software studies. So I've been working with Wendy Chung and also Noah and Xu Zhang about the software studies series at the MIT Press as co-editor. So it's something we consider software studies as an academic field that takes software as a cultural artifact. So interested in particularly not just like computer science way of doing software, but really interdisciplinary mixing art, science, and humanities or critical theory. For example, Wendy's particularly interested in critical race studies. I'm interested in queer feminist perspective in order to open up more intersectional academic work in software studies. So if any of the audience are doing some kinds of book projects, and if you are interested, feel free to submit a proposal to the software studies series. And the link the person posts is the reason of rebooting the series, because previously was Lamanovich, Matthew Fuller, and other people who were the editors. So we had new team, so that's why new reboot and also new perspective in managing the series.
Thank you, Winnie. So now there are some questions for display distributable 展销场. So I'm going to read in Chinese also. 请问非展销场的出版物可以加入后勤慢递的网络吗?
How can we join network of slow logistics? And so the slow logistics, how did they come about? And also, would you like to give us like the slide prior to the deep research? And what about the buyers? What are they? Who are they? And also, are they going to come across some difficulties as they go through customs clearances? And how do you deal with such difficulties?
Yes. So I tried to reply quickly. But the first question about books that are not part of our distro that want to be carried, it depends on the availability of courier. I'm happy to help people if possible. So we have done it in the past, but again, it's a very slow and process that works by chance. So it's not always possible, but if anybody is interested, they can always contact me. I mean, we've also carried other sensitive items or things that are not books as well as part of this process. So it's just about finding a match, really. About how this project came about, I actually failed to mention, it's written in the second catalog. This project is actually inspired by another artist project called Feral Trade, she labels herself as a business artist, I think, so to speak, but who's based in Bristol in the UK, named Kate Rich. And she's been running for many years a sort of distribution service for things like coffee and other food products that are distributed in the exact same way that we do. So we definitely give a lot of credit to her for inspiring our project. And it was simply that our interest and focus on publishing became the sort of main content that we are transporting. And that relationship, I guess, to the previous slides, my slides got all messed up because of the weird technical glitch, but I'm not sure which ones you're referring to. But I think for me, Display Distribute's initial sort of founding and observational documentary interests come very much out of this transport of goods across the border between Shenzhen and Hong Kong. And so these kinds of movements and the ways that a very small scale sale of like basic objects relate to very large scale questions of capital globalization and capital have been really the core of why we started doing all of this. And about the kind of people that buy from us, I mean, it was never intended that this project is only about friendship or only through friends, but of course, because it is person-to-person network-based, a lot of it starts from our friends and people that we know, because these are the people we know that are traveling. So, for example, if I'm working in the art world, a lot of the people that I find that are helping to courier were going to be other people in the art world. And in a way, it's kind of ironic, but then we basically piggyback or pirate off the privilege that the art world has, because these are the people that are still traveling nowadays. But it's not only these people. So sometimes random people that we don't know buy from us. There are certain books that we distribute in Asia that are not distributed by anyone else in Asia. And so people come to us by finding us on Google because they're looking for a specific book. Some are scholars, some are just young people, like Wen Qingnian or whatever, you know, there's not really we haven't done marketing statistics to see exactly who everyone is.
About the custom, how do you deal with custom?
All right. I mean, mostly it's very small quantities. So we've been lucky that we haven't been caught. I think there has been one case that I can think of off the top of my head where I think the courier at first volunteered because they were interested in the project. But then I think they started thinking of these kind of connotations of sensitivity with them going across the border. And so they ended up not doing it for us anymore. But as far as what has gone through so far, we've been quite lucky.
I think there's also questions asking how they can become a courier for your logistics. Is there a way
you can sign up via the website. So I think that link was shared earlier, and there's a little fill in the blank thing that you can email us as also, or contact us through Instagram or any of those channels, and just let us know your travel dates and where you're going, and we will basically try to find a match for books that need to move.
Yes, thanks, Elaine. I posted logistics link so people can just have a look. We can also post it in the slide though. Thank you, Elaine. So question for Queenie. So I'm going to say in Chinese. So the audience asked the Chimera project. I'm going to actually say in English. Made them thought about WeChat reading. So there's a reading function in WeChat. So where that somebody can click a sentence and they will see other people's comments. So it's very interesting. So they want to ask, compare with this kind of commercial already applications, what's the advantage of your sort of experimental reading group? Because a commercial platform has a huge user base.
Thanks for translating. Yeah, I think maybe I'm a bit curious about the notion of advantage, or what's the strength of, because I don't necessarily think that the success of this reading group is being defined by reaching a large numbers of users, or in a way that achieving the same success that commercially defined. So to me, we are more curious in thinking about the whole experience of reading, like how we can have different ways of readings together. And I think just according to participants' reflections, many of them enjoy just this idea of having a group to do something together. So you know that there are 5, 6 enormous person that in anywhere of this world kind of going through this process with you and circulating and receiving surprised readings. And at some point that you're able to meet each other and reflect on this experience, something that people find very interesting, kind of giving them motivation to read every week also, but also this idea that every participant needs to first contribute a reading. So you will donate a readings to be read by anyone, and at the end you will receive your reading back full of all the participants' reflection and questions and thoughts. And I think this is kind of this process of give and take as well that differentiate from perhaps, I think also kind of Amazon's kind of have similar functions, but I bet there's something different.
Thank you. There's no immediate questions. We are coming to quite late the time, but I just wondering if our panelists still have something to comment on each other's or to talk to each other. We can also just freely have some minutes to chat before.
Maybe just an add on to the response from Queenie. Or the questions that the person just asked. I feel is also like maybe the way of how you do the reading group also create a different kinds of community, and also I believe every tools has a different affective dimension. It's not just only for the functioning of like, okay, A, B, C, D, E tools can serve the same purpose and they are the same. I feel like the way of how you interact or the way of how you also within more human touch to it, or the way of how you organize it and the rules, like if you use Linda's terms, like rules-based system, like how these rules set up and how things emerge, maybe it's also creating a different environment of reading or reading otherwise, I think. Just a comment. Yeah.
Someone wants to sign up, Queenie.
That's from Elaine. I think I think there are a lot of platforms today we talked about. They're open sourced. They're actually can be open or can be forked when it's term by any other audiences. So it's not necessarily we are setting up something unique. We are, I think, confronting what we have been experienced and giving our own kind of solution base, but not necessarily in a pure pragmatic manner. There's also a lot of poetics, a lot of provocative dimensions. Maybe if you don't have any remarks, we can also ask if Professor Huang Sun-Chuen wants to comment on something, since this is the last city panel, and I'm also curious of his observation after organizing this huge
I would like to know.
network conference.
I think Professor Huang did have not any questions.
Okay.
He just want to say thanks. Thanks to all you. Thanks for you being here.
Thank you for inviting us.
因为我声音快要没有声音了，因为这几天的城市论坛 ，so I'm really thank you all can participate this event. Really appreciate that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Wang Laoshi. Okay, if there's no more questions, for sure we can continue this dialogue. And the Slido portal actually, I think, will be kept for some days. Yeah. So feel free to go back to it to post questions or comments. We also have April that have been diligently posting all the links of our each speakers. So feel free to explore them to also see what are the future opportunities to build up this cross-regional, cross-gender, cross any disciplinary or cross-boundaries collaborations. So I'm just also very grateful again for all our panelists and stay up so late or in your own time zone. And also to make this happen. And thank you a lot for Hangzhou staff. And thank you very much for our translator. I think they have done a great job throughout. Yes, and thank you for Hong Kong to make we meet, to make us kind of cross path with each other.
Yes, sure.
Okay, so thank you everyone. Thank you for the audiences who stayed up with us. We also have a huge number active audiences.
Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyable for this talk. Thank you for the organizer. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
See you soon.
Good night. Bye.